Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Hinata Passed the Test of King Naruto. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
You know maid. Chan, I can never marry the man I love. Lee's mind echoed Tenten's words. His brows were knitted as he gazed at her. Apart from losing the person you love the most, what else is cruel in this world? Loving someone you can't have is what it is. Because it only lasted for about an hour. The pain it causes was worse than a toothache. A lifetime of heartache is possible. Why is that Tenten? Heim. The princess of Earth ceased to scoop her food. She sighed deeply and pushed her plate out of her way. She simply stopped eating. Why wouldn't she? She was carrying a terrible burden. My father wanted me to marry someone I don't even know. If I recall, he is way older than me. I mean, I'm just 18 years old, she barked. Then there was silence for a minute. What should he have said? Give her congratulations on getting married. No, it was obvious that she didn't like it. Reassure her that everything will be fine. It will be a falsehood. She will be with him until the day she dies once she is married to him. Gritting his teeth, Lee swallowed drearily. After the awkward silence, Tenten added, "Besides, I should be the one to choose who my husband will be." Why? Yes, he stammered, uncertain of what to say. But may I know who the lucky guy is? She crossed her arms and replied, "Lucky my butt." She puffed her cheeks, then turned to her side and pouted. Despite the gesture's simplicity, a smile that showed off his bright teeth appeared on his lips. Despite being a princess, she acts more like a man. Lee was intrigued by her speech patterns, hobbies, and personality. She questioned, "Why the hell are you laughing?" She is annoyed. Did she appear unattractive? She glared at him and immediately stopped pouting. His words, "It's not a bad thing, believe me," were intended to cover up her blushing face. She had just caught him grinning foolishly at her. "It's just, you're a strange princess." Tenten looked down at her lap. "That's why my father always scolded me, he kept telling me I'm not a proper princess." Her voice pierced his heart with sadness. He wished to alleviate her pain. Lee said to her, "It's true, you are not a proper princess," as he moved toward her. He added, "I think you are a cool princess," as his footsteps caused her to turn to face him, and then he struck his nice guy pose. The princess's gaze remained fixed on him. He found him sparkling somehow. She lowered her head. "You're the first one to say that. If you were a guy, I may have fallen for you." His eyes nearly popped out of the right minister's left hand. "No, it is not possible. It's not a smart move. He should refrain from giving her more comfort, from making her feel worse, from getting any closer to her, and from going too far." Lee was a spy. He would bring Tenten's nation to its knees. Besides, he'll go once his mission is over. They'll leave her alone. He was well aware that he would only make her suffering worse. Tenten saw his face go white and said, "But, that's impossible." "Ha." To him. Lee was able to share her laughter. "I see, ha. Well, I'm going now, Tenten. Heim, just call me when you need my help." "Yes." Lee hurried out of the room, being careful not to let the princess know that he was leaving. In actuality, he also enjoyed the thought of her falling in love with him. When she told him about her father's treatment of her, he initially believed that he was feeling sorry for her, but now he truly cared for her. Tenten was different from other princesses in that she had deep, tiny scars. Her clandestine training with her kunai was the cause, but his father's actions also contributed to some of it. She had a talented mother. She was her idol. She fought in the war and lost her life there. She thought her father was concerned about her because he was preventing her from improving her fighting abilities. She believed that his only concern was that she might sustain injuries from it. However, the truth was horrifying. In order for her to marry a strong prince, her father only desired that she be more beautiful than any other princess. Tenten was merely King Mifune's investment for his egotistical vision. Lee discovered her room empty later that day just as she was ready to serve her afternoon snack. He looked in her special secret room in the bathroom, but she wasn't there either. He made the decision to search the palace room for her. He heard the king yell just before he passed his office. "I told you, you have no choice. Your life is mine and you can't do anything about it. So when I say marry Prince Sai, you will marry him." Lee saw him reprimanding Tenten as he slowly opened the door. She was pleading while kneeling in front of him. I don't want to. Please father, don't," she said. Mifune gave a headshake. "It's final." Now furious, Tenten got to her feet and gave her father a fierce look. She detested him. She hated him. Well, fuck it. Lee's face became wide-eyed. Her daughter had just been slapped by the king. He had no idea that a father would hurt his own flesh and blood. Anger spread throughout his body. The girl he found interesting could not be harmed. Ten glared at her own father while her cheek burned. The majority of them were more malevolent than that, but she always got them. Her suppressed feelings exploded. "Fuck you," shouted she. She simply cannot allow him to tell her what she needs to do. She was more aware. Lee hurried in as her father raised her hand to strike her again. He blocked his hand to stop him. Ten was stunned by the sight, and Mifune furrowed his brows. "Please calm yourself, Mifune. Sama. Prince Sai may drop the marriage if he knew Ten." Haim's face was bruised. The king waved his hand and said, "I see. Bring her to her room and make sure she won't leave there." "Yes, Mifune." Sama. Naruto said they would meet there, so Hinata went there. Minutes passed while she waited there, and then hours. It was now late in the afternoon, as the sun was high in the clouds. She didn't sigh, though, despite waiting there for over 3 hours. She was waiting for him calmly. In silence, she observed the leaves as they swayed in the wind. Sakura gasped, "Hinata." "Haim, I apologize for being late in telling you this." Hinata gave her a look. "Osama can't come. He was summoned on the east part of the country to fix some problems," she said. "He said he's sorry for he can't come." Sakura was expecting to see a sad expression on her face or a hint of disappointment in her eyes, but she didn't. Hinata gave her the same warm grin she was accustomed to. It's okay, Sakura. Chan. I recognize Koko. Sama's responsibilities." The maid with the pink hair gave Naruto a mental punch to the face. Why did he behave this way toward his future wife? She would undoubtedly give him a lecture on his obligations as Hinata's fiancé. Sakura said, "Haim, allow me to show you to your chamber." She got up from her chair after Hinata nodded to her. She approached her slowly. Her assistant also waited patiently inside Hinata's chamber. Even though his stomach was rumbling, he wouldn't touch his lunch. He desired to have dinner with Hinata. She resembled a cottontail grazing on the grasses when she was eating. He thought it was very cute. Gaara had always glanced at her, and once, when their eyes locked, he nearly passed out. Shukaku grumbled that Hinata had eaten already. What can you expect? She's with her fiancé. Gaara remained silent. Even though it's true, there is a glimmer of hope that Hinata will join him in devouring the food that Ino served. His stomach began to growl just by looking at them and smelling them. 2 hours have passed since lunch. Tea. Thank you, Sakura. Chan, that sweet, recognizable voice said at last. In an attempt to muffle the sound of his stomach rumbling, Gaara pressed his stomach with his left hand. He gazed at the door and saw Hinata come in slowly. Her gentle face changed to one of surprise as she turned to face him. Gaara.kun. The Auburn maintained his stony expression. Yes? Then Hinata rushed over to sit at his front, the food table between them. Why. You should have eaten. Why you shouldn't have waited for me. He detests her expression. Her troubled eyes, furrowed brows, and creased forehead. She shouldn't have been concerned about him. I'm fine, Hinata. Sama. I'm sorry. Gaara gave a headshake. He changed the subject and said, "It's not important. How was your day with Koko, Heika?" Hinata raised her right hand and placed it just below her chin, clenching it gently. Her head cocked slightly to the left. If failed to see him. His heart burst with joy. He had been worried about what might have transpired between Hinata and the king all this time. He was glad that they didn't spend time together. Naturally, however, it was quickly overtaken by waves of guilt. That must not be how he feels. Hinata. Haim, are you depressed by it? Hinata gave a hostile shake of her head, when she honestly responded, No, I knew that things like this would happen. He looked at her once more. She appeared weak, like a delicate young flower. She is the kindest of all, so no one dares hurt her. Aside from the blustery wind. If so, he's ready to stand in the way of their efforts to protect her by becoming a massive tree. He wanted to be with her more and more. Like a rose, she was. He was closer to getting hurt the more enthralled he was with her. A familiar sound instantly smothered the torrents of his thoughts. Hinata bowed her head, letting her dark blue hair cover her face. I'm sorry, she said. Her stomach simply rumbled. His face lit up with a smile. Let's just eat, Hinata. Sama. Whispering, Why. Yes, Hinata said. She always held Gaara in high regard. Like Kiba, he was kind. She found it warm when he repeatedly reminded her to take care of herself. He was a good-looking, gentle man. She touched the top of his head while studying him without realizing it. W. I was just curio. You can touch them, he said, breaking off. With a nod, Hinata ran her fingers through his hair. Gara shut his eyes. It was a pleasant sensation. A few strokes later, she pulled her hand away. His eyes opened once more. Your age. Hair is smooth. I like them. What's up with my hair? Why not just me? Thank you, was his response. He cursed in his head, she was killing her. Night quickly came, and at precisely 8 o'clock in the evening, Naruto, Zabuza, Haku, the current right minister Iruka, and the left minister Danzo arrived. Now that he could personally apologize to Hinata for abruptly leaving without saying anything, the king felt relieved. He was anxious, though, at the same time. What if she decided against it? What if she came to despise him as a result of that one inconsiderate act? Was she let down by him? Did he cause her to feel less love for him? The dreaded King Naruto had his throat dried up somehow? Kurama's eyes rolled. Just shut up and go get your ass to her chamber, idiot, he said. He hurried to his room, dismissing the officers of the castle with haste. Iruka and Kakashi wiggled their brows and looked at each other. His desire to see his future wife was presumed. As soon as he arrived at his chamber, Naruto took off his kimono and quickly changed into his regular one. The hell, Naruto? What are you doing? After tying it, he replied, changing. The fox's face was palmed. You don't have to do that, just go to her already. No way. I came from a journey. Hinata. Haim might find me disgusting. The smell, I mean. How girly of you. It was Naruto who rolled his eyes this time. He was about to exit his chamber after changing when Sakura slammed his door shut. She had just finished cracking her knuckles and her eyes were burning with rage. She was obviously angry. Naruto retreated a step. She said, Osama, welcome home, and smiled at him. I humbly prepared something special just for you. Please accept it wholeheartedly. He swallowed nervously against the cold wall behind him. Thanks, Sakura-chan, but I'm fine, he replied, raising both of his hands. Sakura moved forward. Oh, that would be disappointing. I believe you deserved a beating after what you just did to Hinata, Haim. I'm sorry for that, but I am on my way. Please save it for later. No, I order you to save it for later. She retreated from him. Commanding me Osama, I am still your older sister. I shall discipline you for making a beautiful lady wait for nothing. Hinata. Haim waited for you for 5 hours. Naruto froze in his place, asking, What? I kept observing her from the window of the clinic. She's sitting there quietly near the fountain ignoring the time and the hot sun rays. She must have her creamy skin burnt now. Naruto squinted his wide eyes. I did send someone to tell her I won't come. Well, that person didn't told her what you had said. I checked on you and when I found out you were gone, I ran towards her telling her you had departed. I pity her. No, I pity you. Hinata. Haim is precious. She really loved you more than she waited patiently, not sighing, not even complaining. She's not even sad. I thought I had made her cry, I thought she hated me now. Hinata. Haim didn't shed a tear. She gladly told me she knew about your responsibility as the Fire's King. Damn it, Naruto, you are lucky. What greatness had you done that the gods sent her to you? I guess I deserve a punch. Sakura calmed herself when she noticed his abrupt shift in aura. I'll save it for later, Osama. Besides, if I punched you now, Hinata, Sama will see your bruised face. She worries about everything. Naruto said, thank you, in a half whisper. Then he abandoned her. Stay here, I'll go to Hinata. Haim's chamber alone, he told Zabuza and Haku. In agreement, the two bowed their heads. Naruto filled himself with air and let it out gradually as he arrived at the princess door. How would he start? Say, good evening, to her. Let's say she looked beautiful tonight. However, she always looks amazing. Perhaps he ought to apologize outright. After a minute of internal conflict, Kurama fortunately refrained from joining. He would undoubtedly simply claim to be pitiful. There was no answer to the question, Hinata. Haim, I had come. May I enter? The silence was deafening. The king swallowed. She seemed to be ignoring him. She must have felt hopeless. He'll accept it if she doesn't forgive him. At least offering her an apology was the last thing he could do. I'll enter then. His hands were cold and sweaty as he opened the door. He wasn't sure if his body felt heavy or if time was moving slowly. However, he anticipated seeing a furious princess. Maybe a somber one? His mind was filled with various Hinata facial expressions. but it was all erased when he noticed her dozing off on her table. Prior to falling asleep, Hinata had just completed writing a letter. She must have spent the entire day exhausted. Not wanting to wake her, Naruto approached her slowly. He paused in front of her and examined her face as she slept. Her right face was hidden by her crossed arms on the table, revealing her left. The king became aware of her long eyelashes at that point. She had a cute nose that was now turning red. The chilly winter breeze was most likely to blame. She parted her plump lips. The princess had a doll-like appearance. Her steady breathing was evidence that she wasn't. He felt a wave of relief. He felt relaxed just by looking at her. Naruto saw a piece of paper next to her. He was meant to ignore it, but his curiosity overcame him. Using his icy hands, he carefully raised her elbow and took the paper. He discovered there that she was the author. Her writings were as tidy and exquisitely composed as she was. His red eyes read them without a wasted moment. Greetings, Kiba.kun. Naruto took a moment to read. Kiba, who the hell is she? And why does Haim use kun? When addressing him, he kept reading, hungry for some information. How are you? Here in the fire country, I'm doing great. I have grown to like the people here. You need not be concerned about me. Kiba was concerned for her. That was more obvious than ice. Now the king was resentful. There are just two reasons why a man might worry about a woman. Either he loves her, or she is important to him. Are we harmed by the waves? Say no, please. How is eldest sister? Since she is in charge of the water country, I hope she is not overstressing herself. What about the older sister? She must be doing well. Please look after them for me, Kiba.kun. As always, the little gentle princess. He grinned at that, but when he saw Kiba's name, he scowled once more. Naruto had no idea that she had sisters. In fact, he knew absolutely nothing about her. He scowled even more at that. He was the worst spouse anyone could have. You were missed. I also miss Akamaru. I long to see you once more. Take care of yourself until then. Love the Hinata. Naruto went over the final paragraph again. When he read, I long to be with you again, his eyes stopped. He then read the final section. Hinata, love. He felt the pain he had known before. It was as if someone had squeezed his heart. His face was stern as he gazed at the princess, who was sleeping. You misled me. After that, Naruto put the paper back on the table and hurried out of her room. Despite writing a love letter to that Kiba, she claimed to love me. I was duped. I ought to have known. Kurama had a contorted face. How illogical could his king be to say, Oi Naruto, calm down. Kurama, not tonight. Simply keep quiet, but you are acting recklessly, let her explain. It has been demonstrated. What else is meant by that letter? She just claimed to love me so I could choose her, even though she loves Kiba. She took that action in order to transform from a poor princess to a powerful one. They are all identical. Naruto was rendered speechless when he said, now that is really stupid. I didn't know you think of Hinata. Haim like that. Falsehoods. He told lies. How could he despise Hinata? God. Do you think she can do it? I bet your brain was shook hard during your journey, Kurama said. Knowing she loves someone else makes it safer for me to hate her than to love her. What you gonna do? Call off the wedding. I will call of the marriage, Naruto exclaimed as soon as he arrived at his chamber. When Sakura heard him, she cried out, what? She simply went into his room to bring him his tea. Are you serious? The king's gaze shifted to his feet. Yes. I just found out Hinata. Haim doesn't truly love me. She loves Kiba, the man from her country. Did she said it? No, is that your opinion or just results from your wild imagination? Both, TCH. Osama, ask her. I don't want to see you sulking in the future regretting again because you lost someone you love, she replied. On top of his table, she set the tea. I don't love her. Yet, or perhaps you are just lying to yourself. He is undoubtedly lying. He fell in love with her, but he no longer sees her as a reminder of his previous love. Despite having a different personality from the princess who passed away, Hinata had won his heart. Now, however, he was about to crack. What was the number of times his heart would shatter? X. Despite the fact that it was just another day, the sun was obscured by the gray clouds. It's an indication. Winter will arrive soon. In a few more weeks, the entire fire country will be covered in white paint. When Hinata opened her eyes, she discovered that she was now on her bed. Gaara warned Hinata, Sama not to sleep on her table ever again. She apologized to him after slowly sitting up. These past days, I felt like I'm exhausted. I am sorry for worrying you. Gara, Coco. Heike visited you last night, she said. Even though he didn't want to say it, he would do it if it would make her happy. K. Coco. Sama? Inquired Hinata. He was correct. Her face brightened, he noticed. Never mind that. Ino came and told me he summons you after breakfast at his office. I could escort you if you want. I'm F. Fine. I'll manage to arrive there safely. Why, you don't have to worry a lot about me, Gara.kun. How was he unable to? For heaven's sake, he loves her. In any case, he simply nodded slightly to her. I'll wait here, Hinata. Sama. X, Naruto declared, enter, upon hearing Hinata's voice. His gaze remained fixed on the papers on his table. Hinata opened and shut the door slowly. She approached him in little steps and halted a few feet from him and his table. You can sit on the couch. In an attempt to relax, Hinata bit the walls of her cheeks. There was a problem with him. She had never heard his voice before. It was somehow tender and cold. She waited for him patiently once more, bowing her head and closing her eyes. Naruto continued to sign the documents, allowing his pen's scrawl to reverberate throughout his office. He remained focused on them and intended to state quite plainly that since they would not be getting married, Hinata could now return to her homeland. Her silence, however, escaped his conscience. A set of crimson eyes fell upon the reserved princess. He clenched his fist and dropped his pen instantly. Like a lodestone, she is drawing his attention. When he called, Hinata, Heim. Then Hinata gave him a naive glance. Why? Yes. Naruto choked on what he was about to do. He was unable to send her away in a harsh manner. It wasn't fair to her. He got up from his chair and approached her. The king was seated on the same couch, just inches from her. He was tense as he asked, Do you wish to go back to your country? He remained vigilant, bracing himself for her agonizing responses. Hinata gave him a questioning glance. Pardon? Naruto did not speak. You have someone you love there, right? K. Coco. Sama, I'm circa confused, she admitted. She was no longer anxious. He curled his kimono over his toes. He forced a phony smile. You can return to your country if you wish to. I can cancel our marriage if you want. That Kiba, you miss him, right? I'm sure you wanted to meet him. God damn it. What an idiot. And you call yourself a king? Go take your words back, Kurama said. K. Coco. Sama, Hinata said after pausing. His words finally made sense to her. In order for her to marry Kiba and return to her homeland, he was prepared to forego their wedding. Before responding to him, she grinned. Kiba.kun is M.my half-older brother. When the king finally responded, he could only mumble, oh. Kurama hit his head as hard as he could while feigning that Naruto was in front of him. Naruto, who was suppressing his feelings, let out a sigh of relief. That caused Hinata to giggle a little. I love Kiba.kun. I may also love L. Lot of things, and P. Persons B. But, she raised her head. She was certain that she was flushed. Continue. Without turning to face him, she replied, I will only love you the most, Coco, Sama. Naruto's expression grew hot. What he heard delighted his ears. He felt as though he was alive once more as his uncontrollably strong heart pounded rapidly and forcefully. He grabbed Hinata by the shoulders and drew her to him with his powerful arms and deft hands. His abrupt action startled the princess. Her eyes blinked. The king smiled, but not in a phony way this time. Say it again, but this time, look at me. Hinata's pale skin first turned pink, then darker. She tried to look away from him, but she is unable to do so. He looked into her snowy eyes. She uttered, her throat feeling dry. She was suffocating, but she went on, I.W. Will only L. Love you the most, Naruto.kun, after noticing that the person she loved was thrilled by her feelings for him. His smile dimmed in surprise at her, and he felt a strong desire to embrace her. Although it was forbidden to mention the Fire King's name, he will permit it if it is Hinata. How was his name known to her? It made no difference. He preferred that she addressed him by name instead of Coco. Sama. It's more transparent than ice. She gave her head a title. He wasn't there, but he looked like he was. She was closer to him than ever before. He really was attractive. Hinata thought she belonged only to him because of his crimson eyes, sun-like hair, and scars that resembled whiskers. Hinata was disturbed when the king closed his eyes. K.Coco.sa. The office fell silent once more. Hinata's full lips were pressed against Naruto's. She was initially immobile due to shock. She closed her eyes slowly after feeling his soft lips move and moisten her dry one, even though her mind was not working. Her heart calmed down, stopped racing, and felt secure. Naruto withdrew and studied her. She had raised her hand and touched her lips with her fingers. She didn't answer, but she also didn't say no. Call me by my name. ry.us. Sure Coco.sam. His lips were once more locked with hers. A flushed princess was left behind when he withdrew. If you don't, I'll kiss you again, but I wish I can kiss you whenever I want. Her face turned redder than it had been. She said, N. Naruto.kun. He laughed at her. He smiled and stopped laughing. I'm sorry, he said. He kissed her forehead and cupped her cheek before focusing on her eyes. He was relieved that he wasn't late, even though it took him several days to realize it. I love you, Hinata. Heim. She didn't anticipate his feelings being the same. The overpowered princess let out a gasp. She didn't anticipate his feelings being the same. She fainted after being euthanized. However, Naruto grabbed her before she could even fall backward. He laughed. When experiencing waves of emotions, do white-eyed people always faint? After examining her face, he rested his head on his shoulder and raised her legs with his other hand. He allowed her to lie on the couch while he carried her bridal style. He gave her a smile. He knelt down and used the back of his index finger to trace her face. Sweet dreams, Hinata. Heim, and don't forget, I love you. Shikamaru would constantly get up early. He made a great effort to wake up at 5, even though he wasn't like that in their country. His usual wake-up time was 9 in the morning. The chilly morning breeze didn't appeal to him. The morning itself did not appeal to him. However, since her inn only served breakfast, he was hoping to be served Temari's food. However, there are some issues. Tamari also disliked the morning. She typically sleeps on her desk for the remainder of the day and awakens when someone opens the door to the inn. As a result of Shikamaru's complaints, Tamari became enraged and decided to prepare breakfast just for Shino. 3 days were allotted to Shikamaru to finish the mission. He and Tamari spent those 3 days arguing and calling each other strange, derogatory names that occasionally could be construed as compliments. Hey you, pineapple head, lazy bumpkin, and other names that came to mind constantly took the place of the name he had given her, Shikadai, which Tamari called him. In response, he simply sighed and continued to gripe about how annoying she was. They used to play cards together. It happened on the first evening. With an IQ of more than 200, he would undoubtedly prevail. However, he stopped giving her the money she needed to pay for the land where her inn was built after learning why she was gambling with it. As a result, Tamari repeatedly scolded him for giving up and smacked his head with her fan. She was furious with him. She was always. He is completely different from her husband. Then there was the way his hair was tied, which to her actually resembled a pineapple. She secretly kept her eyes searching his back for the pineapple she liked. In fact, she was examining his hair while they conversed, or rather, argued. Shikamaru was uneasy about it. Additionally, shortly after the first night, she changed her initial perception of him from one of a lazy, pineapple-headed, cruel, and gentle man to one of a man who pretended to be eager to assist by doing something foolish. Tamari became interested in him because of this. On the second day after returning from their mission's search for answers, Shikamaru witnessed Tamari being strangled by one of the men she had sent home bruised the day before. He kept quiet while the 5 men teased her, expecting her to scream for assistance, but Tamari refused to back down. She grinned at them despite being out of breath. He was even able to describe them as shabby men who were terrified of a single woman when they called for help. She didn't expect the man who was choking her to release her, but she did expect a fist to land on her face or stomach. Her thirst for breath was slaked as she eagerly inhaled the air. She also didn't anticipate Shikamaru's assistance. Tamari believed she had figured him out at that point. Despite his bored and uninterested appearance, he was a kind person. His shinobi abilities remained perfect. Because of the light, he was able to subdue the man whose shadow was choking her. At that moment, he recognized that Tamari was still a woman despite her strength. She reminded him of his mother because she was also weak. It was their final night there. Tomorrow, Shikamaru and Shino will depart. When he inquired about King Mifune, everyone remained silent, so they had very little information on the Earth people. He wanted to spend this final night of them outside because it seemed dull. When he descended from his bed, he discovered Tamari consuming a large amount of sake. There were 12 bottles left, and she had already consumed 7. He smirked as he sat on the couch in front of her and asked, "Already drunk?" "As if," hissed Tamari. She sucked down the sake again. "Ladies drink liquor too." Shikamaru laughed. She continued to down the sake like a bottle of water as he watched her finish another bottle. Tamari never ceased to astound him. He was silently observing her as she went about her business. Tamari put the sake bottle on the table and sucked the sweet air after figuring out his curiosity. "Kankuro, my brother died," she said, finally finding the strength to express her suppressed feelings to him. Tears started to form beneath her eyelids as she laughed. "Fuck Mifune. I wish for his death." His smile vanished, and a serious expression filled his face. He was intrigued by Mifune, to be sure, but she piqued his interest more. He was unaware that she had a brother. When and why did he die? She dabbed at the tears that threatened to spill. Shikamaru continued to stare at her as he looked for his green bandana. "I just received a message. I bet he failed the experiment they were doing to him." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said quietly so she wouldn't think he was feeling sorry for her. Tamari happily accepted his bandana when he handed it to her. "It was Mifune's doing. You do ask me why there are few men around this area. It's because that fucking Mifune forcing them to work under him. He was preparing for war. He took my husband, now my brother." She broke down in tears. "They are dead," she cried, draping Shikamaru's bandana over her face. She didn't care at the moment, even though it was clean and had a pleasant scent. Covering her face was the least she could do because she was ashamed that he had witnessed her crying. She chose the sake bottle closest to her in an attempt to muster some bravery. He didn't have a hard heart. He had always harbored affection for women, particularly her mother, and Tamari was similar to her in that she was both strong and vulnerable. He prevented her from consuming another bottle of sake as his eyes grew softer. "You should rest." She didn't look at him with those ferocious, fiery eyes for the first time. Whole sadness, a sadness that pierced his heart, took its place. Her mother gave her the same look the night she last saw her. Tamari returned the greeting with wide eyes. Despite her vision becoming blurry, she was still able to see his pale face. "The words, 'My mother was like you,'" began Shikamaru. After setting the bottle down, she reclined in her chair. He interpreted it as an indication to proceed, so he did. "She was strong and lovable. She is a good mother and wife then." Yes, she was. After his direct response, Tamari bit her tongue. Thinking of what she would say to him, she paused. She inquired, "What happened?" She swore at herself. What other words would she use to avoid hurting him or giving him the impression that she felt sorry for him? What more could he say to make him smile or laugh? Shikamaru let out a sigh. "Suicide. Father died and I was busy being a pawn of war back then." She thought she was not needed anymore. That night, I assured her I would come home early to celebrate her birthday, but I failed. "You see, I'm a worthless son," he said with a sorrowful grin. "I thought by ending the war, we could live the way we were back then, but then, I prioritized my duty over my own mother. Maybe that's what my husband thought too when he went to Mifune. Maybe you're not a worthless son. Maybe your mother was just engulfed with loneliness that her mind was clouded with negative thoughts. Maybe she regrets it now and maybe, just maybe, she was hoping for you to forgive yourself." When she said that, Shikamaru chuckled. It was impossible to forgive the recent war. Hundreds of thousands of lives were lost. Like those who fought for their own gain, everyone who initiated them was unforgivable. After all, humans were selfish creatures. He raised both of his hands and showed it to her, saying, "I am trying to prevent possible calamity. By doing so, to the day I'll die, that's when I can forgive myself. These hands are tainted." She raised her hands and clasped them together. "Shikadai, I survived the war. I didn't use mine to help others. I watched them die in front of me. I only cared for my brother and my safety. My heart is tainted." Having her hands tainted, she released them and breathed deeply. "I envy you." The air became heavy and uncomfortable, and there was silence. Shikamaru's eyes were on hers, and Tamari's were fixed on her lap. He was still single because he had been living a life of self-loathing all this time. He believed that he didn't deserve to be happy because of the lives he had taken. He had always believed that he was the worst person on the planet because he had painted the ground with human blood, but after hearing Tamari's story, he had discovered someone with whom he could relate. His mother was no longer visible on her. He wanted to wake up next to the woman he saw. He stopped, then got up, turning away from her. "I am sure your brother loves you a lot. You are a great sister. Also, I am sure your late husband loves you a lot. He's lucky he had you as his wife," he said. He started to leave her, taking slow, little steps. "I envy him. Being a king came with a serious price. Your life was not yours. You are responsible for the people who lived in the nation you ruled, those who were under your authority, and everything else. You're a bad king if the populace was in pain. You're a decent king if the populace was prosperous. However, you are a miserable king if everyone glares at your back while grinning at your front." That was Naruto's category. His parents above knew he was doing well because he was a king. Despite the size of Fire Country, he was able to control it. At an early age, he governed his nation with goodwill. In exchange, what did he get? His people were afraid that he could kill them all because of the beast inside of him. Despite his best efforts, his kindness fell short of his people's sentiment. Their hearts and minds were clouded by their horror of him. Before the war, there were many Shibabas in the world, but only a small number survived. Sadaijin Danzo, a reputable shinobi in the past, was one of them. In order to prevent his beloved nation from becoming a desolate place, he offered assistance to the previous rulers. He wished Naruto would vanish because he was afraid he would go on a rampage and destroy fire. There's no poverty, there's no harmful disease, but there are sharpening of swords and daggers, Osama. A war is about to start, Iruka informed Naruto. Right now, the king and his ministers are in the king's office. They were discussing the gang of traitors that Iruka had discovered peddling firearms. When will he stop caring about this problem? Why did his people still want him dead despite everything he had done for them? After hearing the report and sensing Naruto's anguish, Kurama closed his eyes and remained silent. He could sense his temper erupting. To be honest, he was also incensed. But Hinata prevented him from recommending that Naruto murder those who plot rebellion. Following the princess's passing, Kurama had experienced loneliness and believed that Hinata would meet the same end as her if there were another war. Kakashi scanned the papers and replied, I think this isn't the first time they tried to sell weapons. Udaijin Iruka, do you know where they came from? Iruka put his back on his chair after shaking his head. They are advanced weapons. I will investigate on it Daijo. Daijin Kakashi. Danzo cleared his throat. He had long since mastered controlling his emotions, so there is no trace of nervousness in his voice when he says, that's good, please do. Kakashi gave him an evil smirk. Although he was aware that he was planning something, he was unsure if he was responsible for the importation of novel weapons. He looked over at the minister on the left. Any idea, Sadaijin Danzo? The minister on the left shook his head. He wanted to swallow as forcefully as he could, but Naruto's narrowed eyes while reading the report caused him to forget to breathe. His palms started to perspire. After a minute, Kakashi asked the same question again. Ah, it could be from us. We are the most powerful country after all. I bet it's impossible for the other country to make those kinds of weapons. He stopped and rubbed his chin. Perhaps Shikamaru, the previous right minister, knows something about it. Iruka and Kakashi's eyebrows twitched. As slimy as a snail, Danzo was. In order for their king to punish him already, they truly need evidence that it was all his fault. In his heart, Kakashi hoped Shikamaru would succeed in his mission. Danzo changed the topic and said, Koko, Heika, you've been quiet all along, what were you planning? He flinched at the first sight of him. He had red eyes. His pupils had sharper slits than before. He was well acquainted with the scene. He'll lose it at the slightest mistake. His head bowed. Pardon my rudeness, he said. When Naruto's dark voice reached the walls of his room, his eyes continued to burn. Maintain the peace of fire, that's one of my mother's wishes. How could I do it when someone is destroying the peace I'm making? I am wondering what I should do to that person once I have his neck gripped by my hand. Should I skin him alive with my nails or should I cut his body parts bit by bit while that person is still breathing? Maybe I should do both? Danzo let out a gasp. That was how he was behaving once more. He was turning into a monster. Inside his chest, his heart pounded frantically. How terrifying was he? Unfazed by the king's act, he observed the other ministers who remained motionless. He desired the dead body of Naruto for this reason. He and the others who supported him will be eliminated as a result. The peace he was bringing was in danger because of them. Let us think about it later, Osama. For now, the east part of the country needs you, Iruka replied. Kakashi concurred with him, urging Naruto to set aside his desire for blood. I received a report about corrupted official there. We must give him the proper treatment or else the fire people would suffer. Effect? The king devoted most of his time to trying to find a way to alleviate his people's suffering, but his subjects didn't even bother to inquire about his well-being. Naruto's blood flow appeared cold for some reason. He clutched his hands as his chest tightened and became heated. Inside him, a powerful force wanted to explode. He was attempting to prevent himself from acting in this way because he might go too far. Tsunade would hit him again if he broke or destroyed anything again. Hinata was sleeping, anyway. 10 o'clock in the evening was still the time. Hinata Iruka furrowed his brows, knowing Naruto better than Kakashi. What time did this occur? Every time Naruto reached that stage, he remained that way for a day before simply calming down when he went to see his departed loved ones' graves. His blazing eyes gradually turned back to crimson as he watched. To his surprise, he broke into a smile. Despite the sheepish smile, he could tell Naruto was happy by the look in his eyes. He finally, somehow, accepted what Sakura and Tsunade had to say. What will life be like without women? He laughed quietly. Hinata spent the majority of her day with the flowers in the castle garden, but she also spent time with Ino whenever she fed her, Sakura whenever she saw her, and Gaara. Half of them had already had their flowers pressed onto her book, which she looked at every night. All of them were amazing, but the one that moved her the most was the blue morning glory that Naruto bestowed upon her. She had been very fond of the flowers. Even though she didn't have a garden of her own and hadn't tried caring for them, she was happy to simply see them. Her life is colored by their delicate, fragrant petals and occasionally less fragrant flowers of various hues. They seemed solicitous to her. She smiled tenderly and gently touched the blue morning glory. Her expressive eyes gazed at it, admiring its subtle blue hue and simplicity. Her hair was blown behind her by a chilly wind that came in through her window. She took a slow breath. It was getting cold. Knowing that she wouldn't be able to see the flower-filled garden starting today, tomorrow, or possibly the day after tomorrow made her feel a little depressed. Winter was a cruel time of year. It was not to her liking. The only thing she didn't like was that Sakura called out from outside her chamber, "Hinata. Hime, I have come instead of Ino." Orochimaru had called Ino, so she was hosting her dinner. Please enter," returned Hinata. She put her book of pressed flowers on a shelf next to her table and slowly closed it. Sakura followed her instructions and should have left after setting the food tray on her table, but she chose not to. Except for tonight, she always greeted people with a bright, warm smile. Although it wasn't shining, the princess was grinning. Something ignited in her brain. "Do you perhaps miss Osama? She choked, her eyes wide. I had last seen Naruto-kun 4 days ago. Sakura exclaimed. "You are calling him by his name?" That thought did not make her insecure. She simply enjoyed being surprised. All along, she was correct. Hinata might have been the one to restore his crimson eyes to their typical blue hue, which is the color of the day's sky. She gave a head nod. "Did he heard you call his name, Hinata? Hime?" She played with her fingers and honestly replied, "Why? Yes, Sakura. Ino. Chan told me about his name, When I talked to Naruto-kun the day, his name slipped on my mouth. I was too overwhelmed by my emotions. Thought he'll hate me." "I bet he liked it," exclaimed Sakura. Knowing Naruto, she anticipated this to occur even though she was aware that it was taboo. As she examined Hinata, who was staring at her lap, her broad smile gradually dimmed. They would most likely lead contented and typical lives in the country if Naruto and she weren't king and princess, respectively. All they would be doing together would be spending time with one another. It was a lovely sight. Whispering, "Naruto-kun likes it," Hinata said. If she claimed she didn't miss him but refrained from telling Sakura, she would be lying. It would only cause her discomfort. Despite the fact that Naruto may not appear it, he was still a teenager. As a king, his primary concern was the people of Fire Country. She wanted him to not be concerned about her. Although she was 16 at the time, she will soon turn 17. However, a person's age did not guarantee their level of maturity. Sakura bowed her head and informed her that she would be leaving. She met Gaara shortly after closing the door. She bowed to him, and Gaara bowed to her. This was always the case. But she had a different plan for tonight. She called him Gaara-kun before he asked Hinata if he could go inside. He looked in her direction. He looked up at Sakura, who was only an inch taller than him, and he didn't mind that he was smaller than most of the other guys his age. Besides, being a premature child wasn't his fault. He said, "Yes, Sakura. Chan?" He was uncomfortable. Other than Hinata, he didn't feel comfortable speaking to people. "I am aware how you look, Hinata. Hime," she said, meeting his eyes directly. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she didn't mean any harm. She recognized the looks he gave the princess. It was the caring way Shino gazed at her. In an attempt to rid her mind of the emotionless boy, she mentally grabbed her hair. "I plan to keep it as a secret until I die." Sakura waited for a trace of regret or sadness to appear on his face, but she nodded since she knew he was undoubtedly acting on what he had just said. "Won't you plan to fall in love with another lady?" The thought of it, rather than her, caused him to narrow his eyes. He wasn't one of those guys who fall in love with a girl and then break up with her because they've found someone else. He didn't comprehend men like that. They might as well keep it to themselves if their feelings would wane rather than declaring their love for someone and then being in the arms of another girl the next day. How vile. I am sure of my feelings, was his straightforward response. She said, "Thank you," to Gaara before turning her back on him. The 6 words stung her from the inside out. She quickly rejected Lee before he could finish his sentence after he confessed to her. This made Shino laugh, something she had never seen before. She gasped at it. After that, she made an unsuccessful attempt to get him to laugh. Do men act contrary to their instructions? Shino's calm gestures and expressionless responses wounded her, leading her to believe he didn't care and wouldn't. He became concerned when she made the decision to stop feeling so strongly for him. However, Sakura had lost her sense of self. Sakura let out a sigh. Contrary to Shikamaru's constant assertion that women were troublesome, men were also troublesome. When she arrived at her quarter, she shut the door and went to her bed. Although she didn't know how to handle her own life, she was interfering with Naruto's romantic life. She was about to give in to her fatigue when she heard a sound she recognized. It came from the window. One of Shino's bugs was there when she went. After that, she shut the window and let the curtain cover the interior, allowing the bug to linger outside in search of a way in. As usual, the Earth Kingdom was silent. If you pay close attention, you can hear the kunais slicing through the thin air on one of those typical days. 1010, however, felt powerless and allowed gravity to bind her to her bed because she was locked in her room. Lee listened to her sobs outside. The song was excruciating. Through Shino's bug, Shikamaru informed him that they had finished their mission and would be departing early the following day. At least he wanted to properly say goodbye to her, but the king, Mifune, had the door keys. It would be simple to grab and steal, but doing so would only create chaos. As evidence of Danzo's treachery to the Fire King, he had managed to steal the paper bearing his name and signature, leaving a phony one in its place. His eyes were worried as he gazed at the enormous door. Mifune will slap her again if he has already done so. When did he start to worry about her? He was unaware. Although he can't make her happy, he still wants her to be happy. She didn't love him, to start. He was aware that 1010 only saw him as a female palace maid and that she wanted to wed the man she loved. She was also a princess. Her needs won't be met by his profit. Finally, he simply felt sorry for her. He was merely concerned, or so he believed, and had no affection for her. He said goodbye to her in a low voice. Naruto went back to his room after his adventure. He was exhausted at 8 o'clock in the evening. He is not able to work 27 hours a day because he has a beast inside of him that gives him energy. As he lay there, he could feel his eyes closing behind heavy eyelids. He had to sleep. But he feared that his nightmare would strike when he closed his eyes. Then he sat down with what remained of his strength. He waited for Sakura to bring him his tea, and then he intended to go to bed immediately. His door opened, but Hinata, his future wife, opened it instead of Sakura. He was as shocked as she was. She thought he would be asleep, but when she saw him like that, she rushed to him. Naruto-kun, she callously said. His eyes were heavy as he said, Hinata. Was he dreaming? God? The shy princess won't dare go into his room without his consent, will she? Conversely, she put her hands on his shoulders. Hinata was standing in front of him, helping him maintain his balance as he hardly sat. She gave him a worried look with her snow eyes. He was able to observe it. With a faint smile, he laid his head on her chest. She was startled, and her cheeks reddened without fail. Naruto-kun, shish, he whispered, then put his arms around her waist and gave her a hug. He listened to her steady, loud heartbeats with his head still resting on her chest. She smelled nicer than any of his pricey perfumes, he thought. Hinata hugged him as she moved her hands from his arms to his back. He purred as she raised her right hand and combed his blonde hair. She kept doing that. She didn't mind that he was sticky and had a sweaty smell. Naruto's strength was gradually returning. Hinata, why? Yes. He stopped and raised his head to look at her. Tomorrow is the 4th day of the week, he said. Where do you want to go? Hinata had a sharp mind. She wasn't stupid, but occasionally she was slow. Her eyebrows furrowed. I'm sorry? Naruto clenched his embrace and grinned broadly at her, showing off his teeth. It's my free day. Hinata made an inaudible gasp and parted her lips. Although he appeared to need rest based on his earlier appearance, she still wanted to spend time with him. She never acts selfishly. Naruto-kun, you need to rest tomorrow. If this happened again, you may catch a disease, she replied softly. The image of him dead in his bed made her shudder. Don't want you to end up like my father. They looked at each other for a long time. Unless he was attacked while his energy was low, Naruto won't die from exhaustion. He won't contract any illnesses that will kill him, but he occasionally gets colds and fevers. But I want to go out with you. Her blushing is something he will never get used to. It was adorable. In an attempt to relax, Hinata bit her lower lip. She said, "S. Spending time with you on the G. Garden is E. Enough for me, Naruto-kun," and he smiled broadly once more. Naruto gave a nod of agreement. "I'll come to your chamber to pick you up personally. This time, I won't make you wait for nothing, believe it." Hinata returned the kind smile. "Yes," she replied. In the hopes that he would break his arms embracing her, she let him go, but he didn't. He desired to experience her warmth once more. He was getting comfortable with it. He would take her with him wherever he went if he could. He had long longed for such warmth. He is eagerly awaiting their nuptials. However, he was well aware of her youth. He was, too. Tsunade stated that it would take him years to make her his wife and that they could only get married when she turned 18. Hinata patiently awaited him, and he reciprocated. It would be worthwhile. With his hands still around her waist, Naruto slowly rose to his feet. Stepping back, Hinata raised her face to meet his. In actuality, she was smaller than him, and he was taller. Her hands remained close to her chest. The only person who saw this night was the moon. He said, "Hinata," without mentioning that she was a princess. Whether she is a princess, a commoner, or a maid, he will still fall for her because she is Hinata alone. His crimson, affectionate eyes were fixed on her. Hinata was aware of what was going to happen just then. She gradually closed her eyes. Kissing isn't appropriate just yet. Even though they were still not married, there is no law that forbids it. Naruto asked, "Please stay for a while," following their naive kiss. Hinata grinned approvingly. He allowed her to sit on his bed while he sat next to her and held her hands. They were tiny, delicate, and soft. He raised them up and kissed them. Without a word, Hinata flushed. "Hinata, tell me something about yourself, if it's okay with you," he said, recalling the idea that he didn't understand. Well, I'm not sure what to tell. I heard you had 2 older sisters and Kiba as your older brother," said the man. He was interested in learning more about her. He was a useless future husband. He had no idea what color she preferred. She gave a nod of agreement. "Yes, I am half royalty and half circa commoner." Naruto put his forehead against hers and fixed his gaze on her pale eyes, saying, "It doesn't matter to me. I love you." She exclaimed, I do love you too." She was ecstatic right now. Her father might have been telling her this. He cherished and boasted about the joy she brought him. She was too lovable and kind to be despised, but she was also too delicate and brittle to be broken easily. Playing with her fingers, Naruto inquired, "How's life back in your country?" Her mind was clouded by the rush of her past events, and she hesitated for a moment. Her heart was filled with all of the joys, all of the cruelty, and all of the hate. She replied, smiling as broadly as she could, "It was nice. We should visit there sometimes," he stated. He didn't anticipate her face going pale, but he did expect her to smile or brighten. Hinata clutched his hands and said, It's winter, my country was surrounded by waters. Winter was such a cruel time of year. It was always that way." She kept herself confined to her room during the winter, with the window obscured by the curtains. She remembered blood on the snow, but it was hazy. Naruto rubbed his thumb across her palm as he sensed her tenseness. "Then we'll go there maybe 3 days after now. I bet there's still 3 weeks before winter comes. Besides, you do miss your brother and you are worried about your people." "Okay," she said, defeatingly. Maybe it was time to confront her fear. P. Promise to return before the first snow comes, please." He could feel her fear and said, "Yes, I promise." He would ask her about it tomorrow, but he wanted to ask about it now. He didn't want his inquisitiveness to ruin the lovely evening that was tonight. Thank you, Naruto-kun. "No, I thank you," he said, giving her a tender, loving glance before giving her cheek a gentle pat. Naruto was taken aback by the ticklish sensation, so Hinata titled her head. He was unaware of her sensitivity. "Please don't get tired loving me." Hinata gave a headshake. I won't." The two of them remained that way after he pulled her in and gave her a hug. The moon was observing the two of them with unrestrained smiles. Who would have imagined that it would feel so good to love someone who loves you back? "I envy him." That was the final thing Shikamaru said to Temari last night. She pondered why, despite having drunk a lot of sake, those 3 words kept her up all night. Perhaps because she was just interested in and perplexed by what he meant by that. But she knew the answer in her heart. She simply refuses to accept it. 5 years have passed. Tamari nearly forgot what it was like to be thrilled. A heart of stone for 5 years. 5 years of a heart that is cold and frozen. 5 years of hiding behind a mask of strength. One individual appeared to shatter her facade during those 5 years. Perhaps stories with sad endings were still unfinished. Although it's too soon to declare that she had fallen in love, she was certain that there was something about him that she liked, possibly a lot. Morning soon arrived and cleared the night sky. Tamari let out a sigh. Shikamaru and Lee were spending their final day at her inn. She heard him mutter about how troublesome things are, and it was the last time she would see him. Even though it irritates her, she managed to smile in her head. He's Shikamaru because of it. She stretched and yawned before putting her bedding in order and going downstairs. It is possible that today will be different from the others. The 2 men from the other country would leave on this day. An hour after waking up, Shikamaru was unable to move his body. He wished the time would stop working so he could continue to sleep, so he kept his eyes closed. Everyone would be happy and satisfied if things were as easy as that. You get what you like. However, people were avaricious and self-centered creatures. There is no such thing as what makes them happy, or so he believed. He turned to his left and rubbed the back of his head languidly. He stayed out of the sunlight that made the outside world invisible to him. He won't even gain anything from getting up early, so why would he do it? There was nothing the king liked about waiting. If someone doesn't show up at his appointed time, he will waste his time. Sakura was the only person who dared to test his patience because he was a king. Hinata didn't wait for Naruto to arrive for an hour or a minute. This was due to the fact that it was the king himself who visited her room and led her to the garden of the castle. The king, however, was the one who awaited her this time. How long? Until Sakura had finished getting her clothes and everything. Sakura wanted Naruto to appear foolish, so it was also a form of retaliation for what Naruto had done to her. She will mentally sketch his reaction upon viewing her masterpiece. Naruto somehow forgot that he was a ruler. He waited patiently with Zabuza and Hiku outside the door of his future wife. His 2 guards looked at each other, their brows twitching. At them, Naruto simply rolled his eyes. Surely what he was doing was instinctive. You have nothing to feel ashamed of. What if a girl was what he was waiting for? Shouldn't he accept such insignificant sacrifices since that person was the one he loves? It's worth it, anyway. Hinata. Would you please calm down? She exclaimed, holding her breath and closing her eyes tightly. Sakura then dabbed at her face with the powdery cloth. Finished, Sakura exclaimed, thrilled with her accomplishment. Hinata started to say, then, but her sneeze interrupted her. She did that 3 times instead of just once. I'm sorry, she continued, lowering her gaze. Sakura merely chuckled at her. Naruto's lips curled into a tiny smile, but neither of the 2 women in the room saw it. Yes, he did hear what was going on and what had just happened. He pictured Hinata's face when she sneezed. Perhaps her eyes would be half open, her nose as red as a tomato, and her eyes would be clouded by tears. He covered his face with his right hand. I'd like to see that. Sakura stepped back, eyeing her artwork, and said, now, turn around With her cheeks flushed, Hinata followed her instructions. She grinned at her and said, yup, just what I had imagined. When Hinata said, Sakura-chan, thank you, she bowed and smiled. Sakura protested, it's nothing don't act like that. She concealed her embarrassment by turning her head away from her and crossing her arms. Now, you should go out. Osama might have fallen asleep since he waited for you for 2 hours. Hinata's eyes went wide with surprise. She said, yes, and slid the door. In actuality, she was in a panic. She believed she was facing a vengeful king. It was impolite of her to make him wait. For heaven's sake, he is the king. By doing such a terrible thing, she might die. As fast as she could, she opened the door and turned to face the king, who was standing only 2 feet away. There were a few seconds of silence before Naruto said, hi. When he had learned that Hinata was going to leave her room, he had adapted. He had cleared his throat in the hopes that the color of his warm cheeks would return. However, his cheeks began to burn once more when he saw Hinata in that state. Once dancing with the wind, her hair was now braided. It is elegantly positioned beside her left shoulder. When her full bangs, which previously covered her forehead, were pinned, her lovely, gentle, and bubbly face was revealed. In front of him, her oddly formed eyes were now naked. She had never looked like this to him. Together with her lavender kimono, she looked gorgeous. He was just astonished and mesmerized. Naruto. Sama, she bowed, then raised her head while maintaining eye contact with the floor. Suddenly, her feet caught my attention. She bit her lower lip and said, I'm sorry for making you wait. After waiting for his response, she slowly rolled her eyes in front of her, only to be met by Naruto's intense gaze. Then she glanced down once more. Talk. You idiot, muttered Kurama. After clearing his throat, Naruto slowly averted his gaze from her. Then he moved forward a few paces. Without glancing at Hinata, he extended his left hand to her. While Zabuza and Haku, the two guards, bowed their heads, Hinata appeared perplexed. Not at all. Not because the king would be departing with his future wife. It's because they were trying to hide their uncontrollable smile. Sakura simply watched the two lovers, who were acting like they were 7 years old, in silence while grinning inside the princess's room. What a sight to recognize. Hinata furrowed her brows in perplexity and said, The king's hand twitched, then curled and uncurled. She saw Naruto. Sama. Naruto gave her another look. She is indeed slow, innocent, more accurately. She might have never had anyone hold her hands. He managed to say, your hand, in a raspy voice. Give me your hand. When she realized what he was doing, a tiny O formed on her lips. Subsequently, she allowed her left hand to gently sway with the air before landing on his firm and powerful hand. Her heart started to feel warm when her other hand was held close to her chest. She only experiences this sensation when she is with him. As they walked outside the queen's turf, Naruto slowly and gently pulled her away without using any force. Although he was certain he was holding her hand, he was uncertain whether she was trembling or whether he was the one shuddering. Who cares, though? She had him, he had her. What else might be important? Shikamaru felt his feet grow heavy as he descended the stairs. He felt the need to stay, but it wasn't because he had to get up. Even for a single day. He detested having to part. He dislikes tears and farewells. Although he didn't want to, he had to leave Tamari behind. When he got to the first floor, he was shocked to see Tamari not dozing off on the table. He was even taken aback when he noticed that she was carrying 2 food trays when she left the kitchen. He said monotonically, I bet one person couldn't eat all those foods, in reference to Shino. Instead of kicking his ass outside her inn, throwing the breakfast he prepared for him in the trash, or glaring at him, Tamari just sighed. The other one is for you, idiot. They remained silent for a moment, not an awkward one, though. Shikamaru's face simply brightened and became calmer. Thank you. She handed him his tray of food, and he accepted it with pleasure. Yeah, here, she said. If you ever spill them, I'll make sure you won't leave here. Fine by me. She exclaimed, why you pineapple head, let me finish, loudly. She wanted him to stay, of course. She's still not in love with him and doesn't like him. She simply wanted to learn more about him. Shikamaru, however, had a different notion. All I'm saying is, don't waste food. Muffled, yes. I get it, he said. Tamari prepared herself for his next statement. His famous, how troublesome, had her on the verge of rolling her eyes. Sorry. She was a little taken aback, to the extent that she wasn't sure whether to laugh or, perhaps that was her only choice. As she waited for his response, her left eyebrow went up. I never knew you know that word. I never knew you could wake up early. Well, that's because I wanted to cook you breakfast. I mean, it's your last day here. I mean, it's because of last night. A way of showing my gratitude. Shikamaru grinned. He was aware of her embarrassment at what she had just said. He desired to give her more teasing. When she behaves in that way, it's like praising her cuteness. Then Shino arrived. His right hand had become angry for the first time in his life. Well, what do we have here? Hinata stared at the scene in front of her. She was blushing intensely and biting the walls of her cheek at the same time. With their hands clasped together, Naruto led her from the front. She had previously hugged him and kissed him, but she had never held his hand before. She was careful not to hold on to him too tightly, and when she did, she gulped. She raised her head to look at Naruto, but he didn't turn to face her. The king, however, was occupied with self-calming. Her hand felt delicate, as though it would shatter if he applied even a small amount of force. The smoothness and softness of her hand only made him feel more tense. He debated whether to release her hand or remain in that position. He was absorbed in his thoughts when he felt Hinata's hold on him become more firm. He cleared his head after taking a sharp breath. He is the one making things awkward even though he was the one who requested to spend the day with Hinata. Naruto said softly, come, and then he drew Hinata close to him. Walk beside me. Hinata let out a silent gasp. The sensation of warmth seemed to swarm through her chest. She took a step toward him and walked at his leisurely pace. She exhaled, "Oh. Okay," and then grinned. He tightened his grip on her hand, and she reciprocated. They were only an inch apart, but they both turned away as soon as their shoulders touched. Kurama hissed, "If you would just calm down and just act normal." He was furious with him. Not really, though. He appeared foolish and is causing Hinata anxiety. "It's because I've never seen her naked face before. She has always her bangs covering her forehead. She looks like a cake. Tempting, sweet and smells good, I know." "No, what the hell? It's just, I can't help blushing. If I looked at her and she looked at me, she'll see me." Kurama whispered the final line, "She'll be your wife soon." As if hugging, kissing, and holding hands are just the things you both will do. Baka. After clearing his throat upon arriving at the palace garden, Naruto released Hinata's hand. "Well, I'm not really sure what to do from here," he said, turning to face her. His lips were crooked to conceal his nervousness. Let's just sit beside that tree, it's okay with you." Hinata grinned in return. He said, the cherry blossom tree?" As they began to move in its direction, it stood in the middle of the garden. There were 2 of them at first, but one of them died. "Is that what it is called?" As they arrived at the location, he said to her, "Yes, but you won't see its full beauty now. It'll bloom on the 4th month of the year. Haven't you seen one, Hinata?" They sat together on a bench beneath the sakura tree. There was no such tree in the land of water. In actuality, a large number of plant species from the fire country were absent. She recalled how blue her house was. The waves teased the white sands, which gleamed in the sunlight. There were a few plants and trees. Although they were also lovely, she saw the various fish species as the plants of her nation. Well, she said, pausing when she saw the king seated nearer to her. Observing her hand fidgeting on her lap, she lowered her head. When he called her name, "Hinata." "Do you fear me? Why is it I feel like you are so close yet so far away?" asked he. Her anxiety subsided when she noticed the sad glint in his eyes. She muttered, I'm sorry, don't know what to do, I'm afraid that I would disappoint you," into the gentle windstream. Naruto raised his hand and used his thumb to touch the tip of his nose before swaying it to rub her hair at the back of his head. How should I proceed? She asked, "Am I boring you?" Despite her fear that he would say yes, she made sure she was ready and that she wouldn't cry if he did. "How would you do that? I could be contented just by being near you, like what happened last night." The butterflies wanted to escape into Hinata's stomach, so they flailed their wings. That's how she felt, anyway. She will always remember her husband B's warmth, and her memories of him are still clear. Before they ever met, he was like the sun to her. He constantly gives her hope that everything will work out. She only wanted to feel him because her love for him came so quickly and overwhelmed her heart. The shyness vanished in an instant. She was only aware of her love for him. She closed her eyes after slowly resting her head on her right shoulder. She felt that what she had done was wrong, and she was flushed. But why did she think it was right if it was wrong? At her, Naruto's body did not tense, not like when he was touched by others. He allowed her to press against him instead. He observed her breathing steadily and slowly closing her eyes. He slowly placed his head on top of hers. It's a normal act, but why his heart suddenly became calm is a mystery. "I have asked you this before, Hinata." But I want to hear the reason again," Naruto said. Hinata's eyes opened. What is it?" It delighted the king's ear. Her voice was sweet and soft, and he could hear it clearly. "Why do you love me?" The princess's cheeks were puffy. Saying it again was embarrassing. He had stated that he wanted to hear it again even though he already knew it. Yes, he was just making fun of her. I believe once is enough, but Naruto. Sama, you're the one who didn't say why you love me. He laughed. Hinata pouted her lips. Yes, maybe? Do you want to know? Hinata retreated while gazing at him with wide eyes. Naruto smiled at her and moved to a new position. Please, don't say embarrassing things. He responded, if you say so, as he reached for her left hand. He put 2 wedding rings on them after rubbing her palm. He would have chosen the most costly one because it showed the giver's wealth and that the more expensive the material, the more love the recipient would receive. He didn't want Hinata to think he was showing off his kingly status by using her. In addition, she was better suited to the rings he had given her. Just the right ring for her, with purplish-white gemstones shaped like a circle that represents infinity. Hinata was aware that giving a woman a ring represents eternal and unending love. The late queen of the land of waves was adored by her father. She recalled his kisses on her cheek in the morning, his kiss on her forehead before good night, and other tender gestures. Even though he was a man, his father never felt ashamed to express his love for his beloved. His words that night echoed in her mind as she recalled how he wept and cried uncontrollably when his beloved wife passed away. Hinata, to love is to be vulnerable. Before it's too late, express your love for the person you love the most. Even though you might end up like me, it will be worthwhile. After all, you will always be haunted by regrets about the chances you missed. Naruto became alarmed as tears streamed down the sides of her cheeks. With concern, he said, "Hinata, are you alright? Have I done something wrong?" When he inquired about how to present the rings to her, Kakashi simply instructed him to place them on her hand. Though he didn't like the idea, Tsunade advised him to ask Hinata if she would want to live her life with him. In addition, she was chosen to be his bride. He asked her if she wanted to live her life with him, but why? However, when he saw Hinata crying and covering her eyes, he felt he ought to have followed Tsunade's advice. Perhaps he wouldn't bring her to tears if he did. Again, he called, "Hinata. He had no idea that Kurama was secretly laughing his ass off when he asked, "Why are you crying?" Women were extremely sensitive, and men were extremely dense. Between sobs, Hinata said, Sorry, and Naruto. Sama. I'm A. Alright. I'm J. Just so happy." She wiped her tears from her cheeks with the hand that held the rings. Naruto grabbed hold of her and embraced her. His chin was resting over her head. Conversely, Hinata placed her face against his chest. He smelled to her like the fresh morning air, with a faint citrus and mint undertone. It smelled soothing. "Do you like it?" "I'll like you more," she said, her cheeks flushed. Naruto chuckled softly. He felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted. As a sign of their love and a union of hearts, Hinata's acceptance of the ring signifies her acceptance of his love. She belonged to him and he to her. Shino and Shikamaru had just finished their breakfast and were ready to depart. Even though saying goodbye can last a lifetime, if the people saying goodbye wanted to see each other, they would definitely find a way to get together. Shino was the first to depart from the inn. He was instructed by Shikamaru to meet Lee in the center of the forest. Being abandoned, he desired to leave in a dignified manner. This was something he had considered last night. He wanted it and was certain of it. After observing Shikamaru staring at her for hours, Tamari finally yelled, What is your problem? Do I have a dirt on my face or is it my face that's your problem?" "No, none of that. You're striking, and was what that's supposed to mean?" "I'll be leaving today, B." Tamari interrupted him and went on to list the items she needed to buy for the other guests, saying, "Just leave already." Shikamaru said, "If only you would listen," and he shook his head before approaching her table. "Fine, I will," she said. She paused her writing and raised her head to look at him. "Spill it." He let out a sigh. After sucking the air, he gently exhaled it. He said, "It's nice meeting you. I enjoyed your company," as he observed Temari's expression, which remained as blank as ever. "It was only few days, but I'm hoping we could meet again." Tamari arched an eyebrow. "Huh? Didn't you hate me? Assumptions aren't always right, my lady." "Well, I hope not to see you again. I'm tired of you complaining how troublesome things are. I wish you good luck, though. With that lazy personality of yours, I wonder if you've done something productive." She kept rambling, but if only she would let him say what he wanted to say. He was so tempted to put his mouth over hers. It is what we see that fools us. Tamari gave an eye roll. "You know what, I don't get where this conversation is heading. Now if you excuse me, I'm busy." He was aware that this would not be a simple conversation. Her attitude was like a coconut shell shielding her heart, and she had her defenses up. He liked her more because she was frightening and had both strength and weakness. Although she concealed it, she was compassionate. Her words did not reflect her true feelings. He wanted to tame her because she was a very troublesome woman. "I am thinking, if you are suffering in this country, why you won't just leave?" asked the man. He wanted her to respond to one of the questions he had formulated. He would go and never return if Tamari were him. "The country where you were born." He wants to know her motivations for removing your loved ones from you. "It's none of your business. Just answer it. Just like what you were saying, today is the last day we'll be seeing each other. Might as well share your burdens with someone who'll weight them too." She glared at him and asked, "Why the hell are you stubborn?" Shikamaru simply gave her a sly smile. "Why won't you say? Is it because you think you would cry again?" "Oh, poor cry baby," she laughed. She shouted, "Fine, I'll answer your questions, damn it. and slammed her notebook shut. Pineapple. Head, spill them now. Oh, just what he had in mind. So, why don't you get out of here? Tamari sighed, I'm at a loss. This place is the only keepsake I have of the people I care about, so I can't leave. I think of my husband and Konkuro arguing with each other when I look at that corner, she said, pointing to the left corner of the room next to the stairs. My spouse used to sleep on the couch next to you while he waited for me, and I can still remember that. It's a place I treasure, she said, lowering her voice. It makes sense why her inn didn't look like that. She refused to rebuild it for that reason, which is why he now understands why she became upset when he pointed out how awful the inn looked. The more he knew her, the more he wanted to learn more about her. Then, the option of me taking you away from here is impossible, he said, nodding his head in agreement. What? Why would you bring me along? She snarled, I'm not a souvenir or anything. Dude, you're truly something. Ignore that. And now for my next query. Why didn't you remarry? Are you crazy? He was certain he was dead by now if appearances could kill. I love my husband and I always will. He will be the only person I love. But I'm sure he wouldn't like that, not when he's not around. He told her to fall in love again and he wanted her to be happy because falling in love is one of the best things in life, which is why it's a terrible thing. I know, she replied, looking sideways, her eyes glistening as she recalled his last moment with her. Are you merely using your love for your husband as an excuse? Do you? There's too much to lose when you fall in love, Shikadai, she said, pausing to look at him with a glint of sadness in her eyes. Shikamaru's brows furrowed. She was beautiful, but he refused to see sadness on her because it didn't suit her. Life had taken a lot of things away from me, my parents, friends, my husband, and my brother, she said, biting her lips. He was right. I suppose that I will inevitably suffer during my lifetime. It must be my karma. Tamari. Chan, one final query. Am I able to win your heart? What, are you, do you? She asked, her face going pale before shaking her head. I'm sorry, but I have fallen for you, he said calmly. He had never loved anyone before, and Tamari was his first love. She also appeared to be his first heartbreak. He took a step back and felt scared when he saw her. But all he did was whine about things and women being troublesome. If he could go back in time and change his attitude toward her, maybe he could make her fall in love with him too if he became more cautious with his words and actions. Shikamaru swallowed hard before saying those words that are piercing his chest with pain. I understand. I thought she hated him, that she was disgusted by him, that he was the dirtiest person ever. I apologize. I have been self-centered. Goodbye, he said, turning slowly and making his way to the door. He will never forget Temari's horrified expression. He heard her say, why? You'll die, and turned to see her face covered in tears. Everyone I love dies, I don't want you to die, she sniffed. She shuddered at the thought of him dying, and the thought of never seeing him smile again choked her. Shikamaru had seen girls cry before, and he had witnessed Sakura weeping because Shino was a fool who didn't realize she was in love with him, and he always laughed at those who made Sakura kick his sides. Then there was Tsunade, who lost her husband. She was intoxicated at the time, and he laughed at her because her crying was like a pig about to be killed, and he naturally developed excruciating body aches afterward. When you see the person you care about cry in front of you, or when Tamari cries because of him, he made sure to teach his students that women are not as strong as men. They are beautiful goddesses who fight a battle of their own, one that pits their emotions and thoughts against themselves. He whispered, I won't die, to her, everyone dies. He said, look at me, Tamari, without following it with a suffix. She just cried last night, and now she was crying again at his sight. Tamari felt like she could be herself with him around, and seeing his comforting smile only made her cry more. She's just one of those women who wears her heart on her sleeves. I am not your typical man. And my name isn't Shikadai, it's Shikamaru, he said, pausing to rest his forehead on hers. I am beyond that. What? I'll put things right and bring joy to your nation. However, I have some things to finish before I return to claim you. In the meantime, wait for me. With bewildered eyebrows, Tamari said, I don't understand. There is nothing more I can tell you. Do you think I'm trustworthy? With their foreheads still pressed together, he asked her. You lied about your name, so how could I trust you? She sneered. He laughed as he edged away from her. That's then Tamari I know, and Tamari blushed, pinching his cheek. Don't laugh at me, he said. Okay, I won't, as Tamari continued to tug at his cheek. You have my trust. I'll wait as well. I'll hunt you down wherever you are if you don't return. I'll come back, then we'll get married and have 12 children. 12? Pulling his cheeks harder, she objected. All right. 6? He cried, but Temari kept torturing him. 3? Good luck, Shikamaru. Don't dare fall in love with the other girls. Whatever, she said, releasing him. I refuse to. Remember that I gave you my heart? He said, blushing a little as he smiled. Temari simply nodded her head, and then she smiled at him for the first time. Temari was right. He was even more enchanted by her the moment he saw her smile. He had no idea that falling in love was a better feeling than he had anticipated. 5 hours later, Hinata and Naruto were still sitting under the sakura tree, and although it felt like he had spent too little time with her, he wanted to tie Hinata to him if at all possible, but of course she wasn't. Naruto's head rested on her lap, which she massaged gently. It was comfortable, and Hinata was happy to be able to help him unwind after his exhausting role as king. Though she wasn't as skilled as Sakura, Naruto complimented her on the way her touch felt, describing it as soft, gentle, and calming. Hinata was happy to have learned how to use her chakra, which her sisters used to describe as a strange sorcery that was helpful. While it felt good to just lie there and sleep, Naruto was fighting the urge to do so with all of his might. He wanted to talk to her more, though. Hinata, would you still love me if I told you about my flaws? Or perhaps despise me? After halting the flow of the chakra, Hinata combed his blonde hair and said, Nobody's perfect, I have flaws too. I killed a lot of people, don't you know that? The land of the waves is a lovely but harsh place to live, she said, adding, yes, I had not killed anyone, but I had let people die because I can't help them. It gives life, and it also takes life. I also killed those 2 girls who tried to kill you, he admitted. He waited for her to respond, but she didn't, so he slowly opened his eyes to see her dejected expression. Completely the opposite of what he had anticipated. Do you hate me now? She stroked his cheek and said, I'm sorry, you have to do it because of me. Hinata, please don't look like that. In order to prevent you from having to do that again, I will be stronger. Tell Naruto. Sama, I'm so sorry. Naruto stroked her cheek this time, saying, I don't mind being evil if it means I'll be able to protect you. In all seriousness, his red eyes said, I'd kill if I had to. But I don't want it. What if the people who were close to the person you killed had plans to exact revenge? Without you, what would I be? Her melancholy voice registered in his head after passing through his eardrums. Hinata. I'm not weak. Or what if they killed me instead of getting their retribution? What would you end up becoming? You shouldn't get as cold as ice, I promise. I don't want me to break your heart. I won't let them touch you. Please, Naruto. Sama. I know you understand that there are other options besides violence. Despite the fact that you vowed not to kill them, I don't hate you for what you did. He felt bad about not keeping his word to her. They say that the person you must love is the one who makes you feel good, he said. I apologize as well. Sometimes I just feel like getting rid of threats, so I'll be as gentle as I can. I never questioned them about the motivations behind their actions. He thought of the things he used to say, asking Ruka if they could just murder the princesses who were candidates. He was evil at the time, his hatred for his own people still present, and he could destroy the Fire Country if he wanted to, but that would never happen. The king who was unhappy with the idea of choosing his wife to be was gone because of his actions. Perhaps she was right, but then again, she was too kind. He had a different vision now, one in which he would rule his country with kindness rather than in fulfillment of his promise to his late mother. He doesn't like the idea of Hinata constantly worrying about him. He wanted a peaceful, loving country because, after all, it's where his future children will live. His people hate him. Then he'll make them like him. I'm glad I found you. When the sun finally set, Lee was the last to arrive at the forest. He hadn't seen 1010 since her father had ordered her guards and maids to keep their distance from her, which was painful, as he had imagined. At least I should have slipped a letter saying goodbye. Centipede. Browse. What are you doing? Lee asked, lost in his thoughts that he had bumped into Shino, who was just ahead of him. He inquired. Sorry, Shikamaru reprimanded them, saying, enough you two, we must hurry back. To which both said, yes. Udaijin Shikamaru, when he and Sakura were both teenagers performing risky missions, he never worried about her the way he worried about 1010. Was it because Sakura was strong like Tsunade that he couldn't stop thinking about her? He felt as though he had left something significant in a cage of ravenous lions, and he would never forgive himself if there were ever any news of the princess of the land of Earth being killed. What if Mifune had struck her again? What if she had been kicked and punched in addition to being slapped? Does she eat properly? these questions plagued him like Shino's insects. Silence, halt, and conceal. Shikamaru gave them instructions, and they followed them. Shino hid on the tree trunks, and Shikamaru hid on the leaves, but Lee didn't hear him, so the unknown saw him. Who are you? He was right. There was nothing inside Tenten's chest, especially Shino's bugs, but he felt like something was stinging them. How could he have left her knowing she was in danger? Lee, he said as politely as he could, and at last he was able to speak to her in his normal voice. That voice. Do you belong to that group? Her voice gave the impression that she was strong, but he could tell she was terrified and about to lose it. With regret, he revealed himself to her, his face visible in the moonlight, and said, "It's me, Tenten. Haim. Please, don't be afraid." Maid. Chan? Tenten asked in disbelief as she recalled those brows that she found interesting. Is that you? Who's that, Lee? After revealing himself, Shikamaru said, "Didn't I tell you to?" And then he stopped talking when he saw the girl, whose face and royal kimono had been ripped by the wild roses and stained with her blood. "He's not an enemy, please calm down." I was all she could manage to say. She had just escaped and was feeling anxious about her life when she discovered that the maid who helped her get dressed was a man. She was unsure whether to be relieved or angry at seeing someone who could assist her, but before she could say anything, her blurred vision turned black and she discovered her body falling. The last thing she heard was Lee calling her name. Maid.kun. Even though Naruto and Hinata wanted to stay in the garden, the night had come and they were unable to do so because of the chilly breeze, which would have caused them to get a cold if they stayed outside. Naruto held Hinata's hand until they reached the king's turf, where he had intended to eat with her but was unable to do so. Danzo was standing in front of him with a girl who shared Hinata's white eyes and short hair, just like the late princess, his first love. His hand tightened around Hinata's, and she looked at him, asking him a question as his once warm hand became cold. "Kakuo Heika, may I present you, Hyuga Chan, the princess whom we thought was dead." Karen said, "N. Naruto.kun," as she moved forward. Naruto ordered her to stop, because she resembled his first love so much that he is insane. "Remember that Hinata. Haim is at your side, holding your hand, oi Naruto. You are aware that it would break Hinata. Haim if you rushed to that princess, gave her a hug, and told her how much you wanted her. Hinata. Haim, would you please go back to your room?" he asked, and he smiled nervously at her, relieved when she nodded and relieved that she didn't ask any questions. Little did he know that Hinata had sensed something wasn't right, and because she was sensitive, she knew Naruto was uncomfortable, so she complied with his request because she didn't want to burden him. When Hinata left without looking, Gaara was waiting for him patiently inside the queen's turf. He stood at her door and smiled approvingly, knowing that Hinata had had a good day because she had spent it with the king. Just before her legs gave out, she called his name, G. Gaara.kun, and Gaara managed to catch her in time. "How are you, Hinata?" "Sama. It's just, my knees won't stop shaking." "I'll carry you to your room," she said, Thank you." She had a bad feeling that she wouldn't sleep well tonight, and it always happens right before winter arrives. How did it occur? Naruto questioned the two individuals in front of him. What makes you alive? May I give you a hug first? I thought I was going to lose you. I'm terrified, Karen sobbed. Wait. Do you no longer love me? She sobbed. Naruto, snarled Kurama. I am confused. Karen cried and covered her face with her palms after letting her tears fall from her eyes. Am I too late? Does your heart now belong to the girl from earlier? She inhaled sharply. He called her name, Haim, and recalled the times he wished she was still with him, the times he had nightmares that made him long to see her again. Naruto. He stepped forward, wanting to stop her from crying because he had failed her in the past and wanted to make amends. His first love was right in front of him. Why would he stop himself from giving her a hug? He grabbed her and gave her a tight embrace with both arms as memories of the past flooded his head and clouded his emotions. I've missed you. Naruto. What about Hinata? Quit, leave her alone, please. Hinata's sister disparaging her was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She discovered something more agonizing now. Despite not being able to hear it, she thought she heard an unfamiliar cracking sound in her chest. Something isn't quite right. Something concerning. She was awakened by it tonight. She kept wiping out the memory of the stunning woman who had the same eyes as her and the king's shocked expression as she stared at her ceiling. At that moment, she realized something was amiss. It seemed like time was moving slowly and the atmosphere was getting heavier back then. She accepted what Naruto had told her in a disorderly manner. Perhaps she was scared to discover who that attractive stranger to her fiancé was. It was a girl's instinct only. But why did it bother her tonight? Naruto claimed to love her, didn't he? Then why was she questioning what he had said? Or did she simply fear losing him? What if he changed his mind about what he said to her tomorrow? Was she going through a difficult time in her romantic life? How Hinata wished the sun would not rise too soon, oh God. The garden ought to have taught her a lesson. Life isn't all sunshine and roses. The first thing she saw in the morning was not the old fountain, the wilting flowers in the garden, or the gray clouds that covered the sun, but rather the person she loves and the princess from earlier. Although she can only see their backs, her once glinting, secretly joyful eyes have turned into ones of longing because of how close they are to one another. That was her only yesterday. There was a desire to be with him. She waited. All she needed was a glance in her direction. She just needs that. A small reassurance that Naruto loved her. Do you call this jealousy? Hinata had turned her head away from them when Gaara knocked on her door. She tried to act as though nothing was wrong while clearing her throat. She made an effort. Her fist even clenched. However, Gaara was aware of the slight shudder in her voice. Gaara said, Hinata. Sama, and bowed his head. She gave him her usual smile in return. He looked at her for a moment. Her eyes were puffy and had little dark circles under them. Her porcelain skin, which blushed occasionally, turned pale, as did her nose. Even though he was a meter away, he could see that her lips were chapped and dry. He furrowed his invisible brows. Who caused that to you? I'm all right, was Hinata's raspy response. She gave a sideways shake of her head. This is nothing. She turned her head sideways as Gaara approached her. Don't say, I'll be fine, just yet. Her chest grew constricted. Hinata. Sama, he said, pausing to get her attention. Last night. Is it because of last night? Hinata had taken hold of his arms for support as she trembled. She appeared confused, as though she wanted to say something to him but was unable to do so. She nibbled on her lower lip. Her brows curved as she slowly glanced at him, her eyes beseeching. The last thing Hinata wanted him to know was, Gaara-kun. Please. Ironically, despite her request to be his friend, she is the one with the secrets. It's better, though. She'll deal with it on her own, as she always has. His voice was dark as he said, No, tell me what happened. He was employed as her helper and protector, but he was really acting as a friend and someone who secretly loved her. After hurting someone he loves, a person will never in his life allow another person to be unharmed. Clearly, someone needs to be beaten. Hinata wasn't feeling well, and her head hurt. She closed her eyes, feeling her world spin, and then she lost her balance due to his confrontation and the thoughts that continued to occupy her mind. Gaara grabbed her left arm from within a foot. Her head rested on his rough chest as he knelt next to her and slowly allowed her to sit on the floor. Taking advantage, are we? Shukaku grinned. But you know well you can never have her heart. It was accurate. She never gave him the same look that she gave Naruto. She doesn't feel the same way about her, it was true. However, that does not preclude her from loving her. He is still capable of caring for her despite this. When was it wrong to love someone? Gaara touched her skin and disregarded what the demon had said. He addressed her, saying, You're burning. The back of his right hand first touched her forehead, then her cheek. He reprimanded her, saying, Don't tell me you stayed up all night. Whispering, I'm sorry, she said. She opened her eyes slowly and withdrew from him gradually. It doesn't ma. Softly, it does matter, he said. You matter to me. Hinata could not speak. Despite her worries, she somehow knew that she had Gaara and that she wouldn't have to deal with her issues alone like she had in the past. She was no longer the only one shivering in the dungeon. She now knew why. Even after she told Kiba not to worry about her, he insisted on helping. She simply didn't want to cause trouble. But when you had someone who cared for you, everything seemed better. Thank you. Naruto spent all of his time with the new princess since she arrived, 3 days in a row. She just sobbed and told him what had happened to her that night. According to her, a group of other shinobi attacked them after her countrymen took her away from him, and she fled as her people stood up for her. She ran recklessly, fell off a cliff, and hit her head on something before she abruptly lost all memory. Very suspicious. Naturally, though, Naruto's feelings for her were blinding him, and he couldn't give a damn. As she hiccuped and sobbed about how much she missed him, Naruto held her close to him, stroking her back and calming her. How did she recall things? After 11 years, she claimed, her memories returned. At that point, she started her quest to locate him and reunite with him. Who would think that? Only a king named Naruto is a fool. He would believe in her, of course. His intense love for her rendered him blind, and Kurama became enraged as a result. He chastised Naruto for his foolishness and cursed at him, but he paid him no attention. Kurama cut off the flow of his chakra because he felt disgusted because he thought he was hugging the girl in question as well. The king lost his extra senses as a result. However, those emotions persisted for a night. It felt so wrong to spend the other days with her. Indeed, he used to long for this moment, to be able to hold her once more, but why did he find himself thinking about Hinata while he was with Karen? Was it because Karen used that name when she forgot everything and instructed him to use it when referring to her? No, he simply couldn't decide between the person he loved now and the person he loved in the past. There was confusion, and he knew it would hurt him in one way or another. He would be hurt because it was important. If Kurama were present, everything would be simpler, but it won't communicate with him. He was completely lost. Even Sakura's tea wasn't doing anything. He has trouble falling asleep. Even though it was only the second night, it felt like the third. His first love was her. He recalled their initial encounter, their initial disagreement, their first date and dance, his confession, and her joy. He recalled how kind and innocent their love had been. He did, however, also recall Hinata. Her tenderness, clumsiness, timidity, desire for his happiness, and deep love for him all demonstrated how much she cared. He cannot simply walk away from her and leave her alone. He loved Hinata as much as Karen, of course. What is the proper course of action? Most of the time, the heart and the mind are not in agreement. But even though he spent the entire day with her, all he could think about in the dark and silence was Hinata. He was a nasty guy. Ino went to deliver Hinata and Gaara's dinner that same evening. Gaara never left Hinata's side when she fell ill, and Naruto was completely unaware of it. She had not yet expressed her problems to Gaara. Instead, she had simply shook her head and smiled before shifting the subject, saying something like that she wanted to go to the garden tomorrow. After greeting her with, "Good evening, Hinata." "Hime," Ino set the food on the table. "How are you feeling?" "Better, and I. It's all because of all of you," she said with a smile. She learned to let things she can't control go by and just deal with them because she had caused them trouble and was tired of worrying about the future. Naturally, though, she missed him. She missed Shino, too. However, she seemed to be missing something when Naruto wasn't around. Ino gave her a smile. As usual, she was kind, and she couldn't help but feel sorry for the princess in front of her. She glanced at Gaara, who was sitting in the corner, likely letting them engage in girl talk, with his eyes closed. She trailed off, "You see, Hinata." "Hime," about the other princess. She looked at Hinata's face, but she could tell that she was prepared for whatever she was going to hear. She was Osama's first love. "Oh, has your heart ever felt like it was being punctured by 1,000 needles?" Hinata let out a quiet whimper. It makes sense why he abruptly forgot about her. She attempted to appear unaffected. I see," she said. "Is Naruto?" She hesitated to ask. She had no right to mention his name now, did she? Koko. "Sama," she explained. "Is he happy?" Ino let out a sigh. "I don't know, Hinata. Sama." Gaara's left eye opened. At last, he understood the source of his princess's suffering. He said, "Pardon me for a moment," and walked out of the room. It appears that someone needs to be beaten. Or one punch, at the very least. "Karen, that princess is like a leech though," Ino continued. "She just can't let go of Osama's arm." Someone she didn't know was now holding what she believed to be hers. When she said, "She does really love Koko. Sama T." Then, she pretended to smile. As though to keep them from breaking, she pressed her arms to her chest. "I'm glad." As Ino said, that smile, her eyes grew wide. She bowed her head and cried, "Oh Hinata. Hime, I'm sorry you have to go through this. I'm sorry I can't do anything." She saw how much she loved the king. Every night, she and Sakura discussed them, including who would care for their first child, how to nurse the new mother, and how to properly care for their newborn. Even though it didn't appear to be happening right now. "No, Ino. Shan, you've done enough." She somehow refrained from crying when she saw the maid sobbing in her place. To be honest, she felt like crying. She had to demonstrate her strength, though. She never wanted to be the cause of someone else's pain. "What will become of you? You're the kindest person I've met. Why was this happening to you?" She wanted an answer to that. Who was she to doubt God, though? Ino. "Shan, I'll be fine. I've been through a lot. I can manage to survive. I wonder, though, if he still remembers me. Is he still concerned?" Hinata released a heavy sigh, carried away by her thoughts. Perhaps she ought to start over and perhaps get out of here. It was just another day, the same routine, but something different. Snow was falling in small pieces. Officially, winter had arrived. A lot had changed and a lot had happened. The palace's garden was drab. The once vibrant space was dominated by black and white. Only coldness and the absence of any living vegetation are present. They all appeared to detest winter so much that they chose to end their lives rather than endure it. Will I end up the same way they did? That's what the shy princess took it to mean. Because of Tsunade's order, Sakura had given her winter clothing, and she was appreciative. Her 17th birthday was approaching, and she had one more year to marry the person she truly loves. She had the option, but she chose not to. Everything became cold during the winter. Her heart was still warm, though. She was still attracted to Naruto. Despite the fact that it was winter, she knew she couldn't change how much she loved him. Was that it? Love, joy, sorrow, tears? Was she at last sick of it all? She ran into someone while strolling through the garden, and her eyes widened in surprise when he recognized Naruto but had different, colored eyes. When he saved her, it was the color of the sky. What a lovely hue. Oddly, looking into her white lavender eyes made his blue eyes seem sad. In the end, she didn't like them. Hinata, he inhaled deeply. How he forgot to utter that name out loud. He suppressed his emotions in order to reach her, give her a firm hug, and kiss her profusely. Since she only loved him, the girl in front of him did nothing wrong. Furthermore, he was treating her like a choice there. He was just torturing himself in her. Should he simply release her? Coco. Sama? Did she not address him by name? Although she didn't reach for him, she said, Yuri. Eyes are different. Are you okay? She always touched his face to feel him, didn't she? Her angelic voice repeated, Coco. Sama. He had no idea what he was feeling at the moment. He felt a mixture of sadness, guilt, and a small amount of hatred. They were two lonely people who loved each other but couldn't be together. But he was the one who made her suddenly change. Perhaps she was aware of who the new princess was based on rumors. Perhaps she also made the decision to no longer love him? What should he have done? I'm such a fool. Too much time has passed since he last gazed into those kind eyes. Although he claimed to love this girl, his behavior belied his claims. He gulped his dry throat and curled his fingers. So why would you want to speak with her? To justify? To injure her even more? She blinked a few times as a tiny drop of snow fell into her eyes. Then Naruto disappeared. Hinata searched the area for him. Did she have hallucinations? Perhaps all she wanted was to be with him once more. How could she bear the hurt of being separated from him? I'm not sure if he realizes how much I miss him. She really wanted to tell him that. However, she believed that nothing would alter. She was then overcome by memories of her time spent with him. Perhaps she could drown in them instead of her stinging thoughts if she sat there and let the snow fall on her face. However, at this moment, a long, tight hug would be ideal. Hinata's window was open, and she hardly smiled. Snow beads were piled on top of one another along its edges. She felt them with her left hand. She picked some of the cold, hardened water with her thumb and forefinger before letting it melt. There was no sign of the sun when looking up at the sky. Officially, it was winter. As she watched the snow fall, her eyes were gloomy. She purred silently as the chilly air breeze lightly touched her pale skin. Outside, everything was frozen. Like her, even the fountain's powerful waters, which once danced gracefully, remained motionless. She has spent the last hour standing close to her window. Her right hand was cupping her cheek as she leaned against the window pane. It was the cold wind that forced her to wake up earlier than usual. Although her room was cold, she preferred it to before. As though her heart were freezing. As though dulling her agony. All of a sudden, she missed the land of waves, her native land. Naruto had promised that they would go there before winter, she recalled. The way that promises were supposed to be broken was tragic. It's funny that she dreamed about what might have happened and believed it, and it was funny how things changed all of a sudden. On the land of waves, winter was both a boon and a bane. There were no enormous waves that could have killed her people, and the ocean was motionless and lifeless. It would have been advantageous, but on the contrary, there is no food source in the land of the waves. They have nothing to eat because of the frozen waters, and their main source of nutrition was seafood. Her beloved nation was the poorest in the world in part because of this. It hurt that other wealthy nations made fun of them, but what could she do? She wishes she could exchange her life for their success. Hinata let out a sigh. Her people were generous enough to give everyone food from one another. All she wanted was for her sisters to be like her. She hoped everything back there was okay. She was obviously concerned about them, particularly Kiba and Akamaru. The worry never stopped. Although Naruto was there to console her, he now appeared to be so far away, so near yet so far away. Untouchable but within her reach. It was awful. No more Hinata that is warm and gentle. He saw it that way. Just in front of the queen's turf, Naruto was en route to his palanquin. She turned away from him for the first time when he saw her on her window. She even closed her window. His throat felt dry, and he swallowed. How ought he to feel now? He disregarded her. What was he to expect? Zabuza reminded him, "Osama, we have to leave. The people in the east depend on you." As he looked out Hinata's window, the king became aware that he had stopped walking and was now stranded there, half open, mouthed and staring incredulously. Haku became concerned. He mentally noted that he needed to persuade his king to come to Hinata. Following, he said, "Why?" "Yeah," before mounting his palanquin. He glanced out for one last time and saw Hinata staring at him once more. His chest pounded with his heart. His warm blood was coursing through his body. His brows were curved, and his eyes were wide. Hina. He was about to call her name when they started to stomp out of the palace and away from her. He will be absent for 2 days in a row. That was always the case. His life was not entirely under his control. Perhaps he should simply remain in the palace to spend as much time as possible with Hina.no, his future wife. Karen. His tongue bled from the force of his bite. It's time for him to get over his thoughts about Hinata. He had promised to marry Karen first. And he told himself that Hinata was the only person he felt sorry for. But he knew in his heart that he was lying. In reverse, it was the opposite. He left the 2 princesses and Tsunade in charge of the castle. He told her to make sure they were both as comfortable as possible during the winter. Without even speaking, the Castilian simply bowed and nodded in return. She obviously disapproved of his preference for Princess Karen over Hinata, his purported wife. Although Tsunade wanted to say that he should make a decision, he was relieved that she didn't interfere with him on that matter. Hinata should not have been kept waiting in vain if his king truly desired Karen. Keeping her out of the dark. Preventing her from harming herself. He had to let go of Karen if he wanted Hinata. That's how simple it is. The king had suppressed his empathy, constantly considering what other people wanted while ignoring his own desires. Because of his vow to his mother, he was a cruel king who wished to exterminate his people, but he deserved to be happy. For the first time, he needs to stop worrying about what Karen would say, what Hinata would think, and what other people would think of him, and instead focus on what he wants and what he wants to be in the future. Tsunade wanted Naruto to move on to the exciting part. He wasn't yet prepared, though. Speaking of being a king, it was never simple at first. Naruto took on all of the issues and worries of the villagers, including the plot to overthrow him, worries about Kurama's safety, attempts to keep foreign powers off his territory, and, most importantly, his marital troubles. He sighed and closed his eyes. He had made such a mess. He ruined what was perfect. Even the person who truly loved him was harmed by him. He was aware that spending 2 days away from the castle would help him deal with the issue, but he was also aware that he would eventually have to face it before something happened that he would always regret. Shikamaru and Shino arrived safely just as the king had departed with his ministers and royal guards. As the right ministers departed for the girl he began to care about, Lee made the decision to be torn off. It had returned to the woods. Since it's already 11, the 3 of them made the decision to camp. The moon was obscured by clouds, and the night was chilly. Princess Tenten was present when they discovered a tiny cave. Lee said goodbye to both of the esteemed shinobis at dawn, promising to come back as soon as he had located a secure location for the princess to stay. Shikamaru didn't agree with that. Without him, enemies could get inside the castle since he was in charge of its defense. However, Lee persisted. Shino was the one who noticed that resolve in him. For the first time, he lost to him after challenging him to a duel. The aforementioned princess then allowed Lee to remain with her. Lee found Tenten tending to his wounds while Shino and Shikamaru leapt on the trees. Tsunade taught Hinata the things a queen of fire ought to know and still called her from her room. She had taught her how to sew clothes, cook, and do other things a good wife should know. Conversely, Hinata had maintained her cheerful demeanor. The Castilian, however, was aware of how she maintained that lonesome smile as if nothing were wrong. How she pretended everything was fine and ignored things. She made an effort to act normal, but Tsunade could tell she was in pain. She was tortured by the last few days. She had noticed Hinata's anguished look as she gazed at Naruto and that princess outside their training room window. She questioned why Naruto, who was actually in love with Hinata, had accepted that princess. Tsunade gave a headshake. What could be more agonizing than having to smile to keep the tears from streaming down your face? However, Tsunade also observed Naruto's actions. He would always glance out their window at Hinata. She smiled as she reminisced about her happy times with Jiraiya before he was buried 6 feet below the ground. The statement that certain people can remain in your heart but not in your life was accurate. However, she hoped that Naruto and Hinata would not have to endure that suffering. Tsunade had seen how they were in love. The thought of what it had turned into stung her. She wanted to cry in rage over it. If only Karen hadn't arrived. She left the room before smashing the table, telling Hinata she would return after doing some things like breaking something. Naturally, though, she kept the last part from her. Hinata eventually completed sewing a scarf. It was lovingly made. It wasn't for Naruto, though. Gaara was the recipient. After gathering her knitting supplies, she left the training room. She had met Karen with 2 maids she had never seen before as she passed the queen's platform inside the queen's turf. Hinata bowed to her and held the scarf she had made close to her chest out of courtesy. She bit the walls of her cheeks and kept her gaze on the ground. She felt cold and was shaking. Naruto had spent his time with the girl. Her heart fell. He picked the girl instead of her. She detested the notion that she was merely Naruto's decision. Meeting him was inevitable, of course. Was she destined to be hurt, though? She held the scarf tighter to her body. "Oh!" Karen cried out as she rushed to her. "You're Hinata?" Hinata slowly raised her face and was startled to discover that her eyes were exactly like hers. She had never met anyone like her before. Yes, she muttered barely. "I'm surprised you haven't packed your things yet." Ignoring the smirks of Karen's maids, Hinata gave her a perplexed glance. Pardon? Karen raised an eyebrow and explained, "You see, you are to stay in this country because you were supposed to be the next queen. But now that I have retuned, you're no longer needed." Her shattered heart was now shattered. It was as if a massive rock had suddenly fallen on her. Her palm got moist, and she had the impression that air had just left her lungs before they stopped working. There was no spittle when she swallowed. It was a sight Karen liked. She visualized Hinata's paleness and her lack of intelligence. She said, "Oh my goodness, Naruto still didn't told you? Please, God, grant me strength." She said, "I see. I'll pack my things then and wait for Koko Hekai's return, then I'll leave," in a dry tone. She never imagined such a thing would occur. She wanted to start crying now. She can't, though. She can't yet. It will be humiliating. "I'd prefer you leave before Naruto arrives. You might as well have pride. I'd be more painful if he's the one who'll say you must leave." Hinata's eyes returned to normal. Tears were forming just beneath her eyelashes, and they had a glint of pain. "Don't cry just yet, please. Stay strong," she said. Then, "I must pack my things now, if you excuse me," and walked away as quickly as she could. Tears fell like waterfalls as she walked past Karen and her maids. Despite her confusion, she is overcome by pain and sadness. She felt as though she couldn't swim through them, and they drowned her. She was pitiful. She wished Naruto had warned her right away that he would only shatter her already broken heart. She could have avoided falling in love with him, at least. She now questioned whether her memories of him were purely fictional. After sprinting to her room, she collapsed to her knees and sobbed. She's a complete mess. She tried to stifle her whimpers, which was the most difficult aspect of her heartbreak. As she looked through her memories with him, tears continued to fall. Her first kiss was from him. Her initial romantic interest. She never imagined anyone would harm him, including him. She was mistaken. She hiccuped, HNN, then she took a whiff. Then she hiccuped once more and sniffed. Her left hand was clutching her chest as though to keep her heart from exploding. She had her mouth covered with her other hand. Liar. She started packing her clothes while her cheeks were burning from the tears. She's going to go now. She will begin anew in a different location. Anywhere but here. She will fix her life and her heart, but she has chosen to forget what she cannot change. Gaara had just come in after she had finished packing. Hinata. Sama? Gaara.kun. She started packing her clothes while her cheeks were burning from the tears. She's going to go now. She will begin anew in a different location. Anywhere but here. She will fix her life and her heart, but she has chosen to forget what she cannot change. Gaara had just come in after she had finished packing. Hinata. Sama? Gaara.kun. Gaara looked at her for a moment. Her face appeared to be crying as she sat on the floor, having just finished closing her bags. His voice was dark as he asked, "Who caused you those tears?" Though it wasn't for her, the voice was lethal. She pretended to smile and used her sleeves to wipe away her tears. I am leaving this place," she said. "I think I don't belong here anymore." Gaara remained silent. His muscles tensed. His favorite girl appeared pathetic. She was like a beautiful flower, but right now he saw her as a flower that was wilting, vanishing in silence as if she had never existed. At last, he inquired, "Why?" Hinata inhaled deeply and let it out gradually. She met Gaara's eyes directly. "Coco. Sama doesn't need me anymore." Gaara ran to her and sat next to her, as quick as the wind that comes and goes. He held her head slowly, as if she were a tiny, delicate infant. After a moment of shock, she calmed down. On his left shoulder, she allowed her head to rest. She put both hands on his chest and closed her eyes. "I promised to take you away once he caused you pain." Hinata gave a nod. I wanted to be by Coco. Sama's sighed. But I don't think he still want me. Karen. Haim said so, she said. Her cries filled her quiet and chilly room. He didn't even told me about it. I felt like she said, crying before sniffing. She started crying. It's like I'm just an option, she said. Hinata stopped crying when Gaara put his forehead against hers. You are not his option. He loves you and you love him too. He did, she said, faltering. Maybe I'm just afraid that when he comes back, he'll be the one to ask me to leave. So I want to leave before it happens. She swallowed and looked at him. I don't think I can promise myself to be composed when that happens. He bowed his head and stepped back from her. If you really want to leave, I will come with you. Wherever you go, I will go. And if you ever want to go back to the king's arms again, I will accompany you, he promised her. Even if it kills me so. Are you content? How can you claim to be content? Does it have to do with your laughter? Yes, but not everyone who sheds tears is depressed. Another morning, another day gone. Naruto was supposed to return to his castle tomorrow. He opened his eyes slowly and gazed at the ceiling in blankness. Once more, it was that dream. He was having dreams about his old memories. Since it was still dark, he closed his eyes in the hopes of catching another glimpse of the memories he so deeply treasured. Naruto yelled, Hanabi, while sprinting through the castle's garden. He wasn't bothered by the snow falling from the gray sky. He couldn't wait to meet his soon-to-be wife, the future queen of his nation. These recollections resembled broken glass. They're distorted, but everything was there. There are always some skips from every event, and some are blurry. He soon fell asleep, only to be awakened by his never-ending nightmares. By the time they reached the fire's castle, it was about 4 in the afternoon. He saw Tsunade at the front of his turf as soon as he got out of his carriage. It brought back memories of Hinata's disappearance. Tsunade said, Osama, and bowed. Ino and Sakura followed suit. Naruto inquired nonchalantly, how's the castle? The three women turned their gazes from the king to one another. He was approached by Tsunade, who gave him a letter. It was from Hinata. Haim. Naruto was unsure of his reaction. In addition to trying to stop another war and resolving their kingdom's economic issues, he was currently struggling with the future queen of the fire. Karen had to ruin everything, but why? Hinata and I were getting along just fine. He paused with those thoughts in mind. Thank you, Tsunade. I'll be heading to my room now. With the exception of Zabuza and Haku, who trailed the king, they were all left outside. He instructed both of his guards to wait outside as he reached the front of his room. Then he went into his chamber. He read the letter while seated in his chair by the window. He started to feel uneasy. While half of him wanted to read the letter, the other half didn't. Naruto gazed at the sun as it set. It served as a reminder to him that nothing lasts forever. At last, he plucked up the courage to read Hinata's letter to him. He read the letters he was so worried about after slowly opening the envelope. Coco. Sama, how are you? I hope all is well with you. Although it has only been a few days since we last saw one another, it feels like years to me. I now understand everything. I realized how much hurt and confusion I am causing you after Karen. Haim told me a lot of things. So I made the decision to go. My assistant, Gaara, is accompanying me. Don't worry about me, please. I'll be alright. I appreciate the fleeting moment of joy. For me, it was the greatest moment, which I will always cherish. Love without end. The Hinata PS. I apologize for loving the sun despite the fact that I am only a moon. The letter was quickly crumpled and thrown on Naruto's table. Leaping onto his window, he searched for her scent. It was less sharp than before, much to his dismay. Kurama, I need you. Please lend me your power, let me find her. Even though it's growing darker, Hinata's stunning eyes will always be visible. She was in the carriage. She kept her hands clasped together as though she were concealing, shielding, and holding her priceless heart inside. The baby blue curtain with the faint yellow butterflies imprinted on it closed the windows. She was never brave enough to look out. Although she knew it wouldn't happen, she hoped to see Naruto somewhere along the road. Even though she wanted to meet the king and see him one last time, Tsunade informed her that he would be returning tonight. Karen would prefer it not to occur. In the end, she is the true queen. She was Naruto's first love, above all else. In contrast, Hinata was merely a fleeting moment. The horse was being ridden by Gaara. He was concerned about Hinata, but he wanted to move as quickly as the horse could. Before it gets totally dark, they must reach their destination. That way, it's much safer. Despite his power and Shukaku, he is no longer able to fight as effectively as he once did. He assured Hinata that he would change from his previous self. He considered what he would do if he ever stopped them, as the Fire King had done. In any case, he will not give him Hinata. Not readily, anyway. Not after his treatment of her. Gaara gripped the rope tighter. His eyes were filled with animosity toward Naruto. Hinata said, Gaara-kun, or why you alright? She proposed, if you're already tired, we could rest for a while. She saw his tense shoulders relax. After all, she could plainly see his back. I'm fine, Hinata. How about you? Are you feeling nauseous? He inquired. He didn't sound as nice as he tried to. He was informed by Shukaku. I see. So you plan to conceal your feelings for her, the one-tailed beast was disregarded by Gaara. Don't worry, about me. I can still manage stuffs, she smilingly assured him. Gaara gave her a smile in return. I wish I had met her earlier. He nodded his head languidly before turning to face his front. A shadow in the forest moved and followed the two travelers as they remained silent. In the meantime, snow and rain started to fall from the lowering sky. Kurama, I need you. Please lend me your power. Let me find her. Naruto begged his tailed foe, Kurama. Please. I need to see her. His blue eyes wandered where Hinata might have been during the protracted silence. He could see the forest ahead from his window. The road was devoid of carriages. There were only two possible interpretations. Either she walked away or she was already far away. Raising his hands, he placed the back of one on his chin. Compared to when Kurama was sharing his chakra with him, his senses were diminished. It would take longer to locate Hinata without his assistance. Hinata. She was on his mind. Kurama kept his distance from the foolish king. Although he is irritated with Naruto, he was also concerned about Hinata. This wouldn't have happened if this idiot had just paid attention to me. He considered his lack of affection for the princess of the land of the waves. When he gave her a hug, Hinata said, You're warm, Osama. He scowled and gave himself a mental slap. She was swept away like tidal waves by an unexpected wave of desire for her. He recalled the tears she shed as she begged for the lives of those who had wronged her. As uncontrollable as the waterfalls were her tears. His heart ached as he remembered how she sobbed when he treated her differently. It appears to have been cut open by a knife. He was taken aback. He struggled to balance his past and present. He was unable to act appropriately because he made heartfelt promises to both of them at different times. But now he knew it didn't matter to think about it. The princess he currently loved, who did nothing but love him unconditionally, was only harmed by him. As his eyes flashed back to their shared memories, he made the decision that he would never let her go. Naruto said, Kurama, I know you hate me for what I did, with a sorrowful tone. But if you don't let me share your power, Hinata may be in danger. The snows are already falling, and if they keep falling, things could get worse. The monarch wasn't asking for mercy. He seems to be controlling the nine-tailed fox that resides inside of him. I made a mistake and I hope you won't make yours. The beast swore, fuck you, and Naruto's blue eyes turned as red as blood. Power surged through his body, and he could feel his senses getting stronger. Hinata's lavender scent hit him immediately. Even though it was dim, he could already tell where she went. If ever you find her and hurt her again, you will never have my power again, Kurama stated. He had a soft spot for Hinata, and he would never consider a woman other than her to be his and Naruto's wife. I understand. His first love, Karen, came into his room carrying rice cakes on a food tray just as the Fire's King was ready to leap from his window. When he looked at her, he felt nothing for the first time since he had last seen her after all these years. The rush he had felt for her was gone. She seems like a totally different person than the young girl he vowed to marry. Naruto. What are you doing dangling like that on your window pane? She responded. After setting the food tray on his table, she approached him. He said in a low voice, Hinata's gone, trying to hide his pain at mentioning the name of the person he loved. She yelled, she left on her own, She tapped his feet and folded her arms. She stepped forward and took his arm, asking, "Aren't we supposed to be rejoicing? Why do you want to find her?" She begged him to stay with her eyes. "If you go, it means you want her more than me." Naruto glared at her and said, "Don't touch me." Karen gasped. His aura sent shivers down her spine, and his eyes were the color of rubies. As perspiration started to appear on her forehead, she stammered, "N. Naruto. Why are you a? Acting L. Like T. That?" Her acting used to be effective, but it seems to be failing now. Naruto's weakness, according to Danzo, was his first love, but that was no longer the case. One of her maids hurried to her master's location after leaving the king's chamber. According to the king, "Let go of me." She stepped back and instantly released his arm. If you go, I will leave," she exclaimed frantically. Kurama grinned and said, "Then leave. Idiot Naruto, you finally realized your mistake." Gaara felt as though someone was observing them, but his gaze was fixed on the road. He braced himself for assault. Getting rid of people who impede their progress was his top priority. "It's not the fire's king," he was informed by Shukaku. "I know," was his response. Hinata became aware of Gaara's discomfort. She said, "Gaara-kun, W. What's wrong?" She was quiet for a while, so he assumed she was sleeping. It appears that she is still depressed after leaving the fire's castle. Gaara started to respond when 5 men attacked their horse, causing it to go out of control. It let out a cry and sprinted toward the forest at a faster pace than before. He thought, "This is not good." From tree to tree, they were bumping into each other. Hinata lost consciousness when her head struck the carriage's walls while he was attempting to calm the horse. In order for their carriage to finally stop, Gaara made the decision to cut the horse's ropes and give up on it. "Damn it," he swore as he prepared to be struck. Their carriage was damaged when they collided with a large tree. A piece of short wood from their carriage pierced Gaara's left arm. He snarled in pain, but before they collided with the large tree, he went inside and gave Hinata a hug. His arm was bleeding, and his head was spinning. He was scratched on the face, but his first concern was for the princess he was holding close to his chest. Tapping her cheeks, he sat and raised her. When he called her, "Hinata." When he pulled her closer, his other hand, which wasn't his, became stained with blood from holding her head. He exclaimed, "No, Hinata. Wake up," he summoned. Despite shaking her, he got no response. Shukaku said, "I think she's dead," without emotion. Around him, sands accumulated as he gradually changed into Shukaku. Everyone he cared about died. Because of it, he thought his sole goal was to kill. That was altered by Hinata. However, he is now losing all of his motivations. Shukaku was taking in the scene. If this keeps up, Gaara would let him loose. His body would be under his control at last. Gaara grew stronger and stronger. He was surrounded by 5 unidentified men who were astounded by his extraordinary power. Gaara cried out, "Erg!" as he at last achieved half Shukaku transformation. "Kill, kill," he yelled out. His tailed beast whispered, "You should go to sleep and let me handle everything." Karen questioned incredulously, "Naruto, what are you talking about? Why, you're fine with me leaving you?" "Yes." Naruto's red eyes continued to glare at her. But I'm your first love." Naruto averted his gaze. "The one I love now is not you." Karen's body throbbed with blood. She finds what's happening unbelievable. She had already been deceiving him. What's happening in here?" Danzo interrupted her. The cunning left minister said, "Koko. Sama, is everything alright?" to him. Naruto disregarded him. Karen fainted just as he was ready to jump below. Danzo shouted her name as he hurried over to her. He begged, "Karen. Wake up." The king chose to return to his room after clicking his tongue. He approached her and felt a lot of chakra as he was ready to lift her up. At their sight, he immediately got up, ran to the window, and vanished. Danzo's hands tightened. The situation is not going well. He had to carry out their plan quickly. Naruto mused, "Hinata, wait for me. Be careful, please." Gaara's Shukaku form ran toward one of the men who had attacked them earlier, while Hinata was inside the sand he had made to protect her body from more damage. His speed was so great that one of the 5 men's arms was cut instantly, and he screamed in agony before his head could move, sending the 4 other men into shock. Gaara launched another attack, but those 4 men were no match for him, and he defeated them right away, but he was still on a rampage. He was still in the process of switching into full Shukaku mode when an unidentified man sliced his nape with the side of his hand, gasping and losing consciousness. What do we have here? My. Sasuke grumbled as he surveyed the area, noticing 5 men's severed, damaged bodies. He chose Gaara's body and hung him on his shoulder before proceeding to the circle of sand and discovering a woman's body, which he was unable to remove because he knew the girl before her. With a faint smile, he said, "You're still alive after all," while a tear trickled down his left cheek. Hime. She was introduced as Naruto's fiancée, despite the fact that he was the one who fell in love with her first. Sasuke recalls those white eyes with a hint of lavender, her pale complexion, the way her face flushed from the cold winter, his desire to touch her dark blue hair, and most of all, his desire to be the source of her faint laugh. Feelings of desire surged through his body. He recognized the unconscious woman in front of him. "You're still alive after all," he said softly, a tear rolling down his left cheek, and he smiled dimly. Hime. He picked her up carefully, noting her wound as he carried Gaara on his back and led them to his hiding place. Sasuke used a clean cloth to apply direct pressure to Hinata's head bumps and bleeding forehead, then slowly raised her head to wrap the cloth over her head. He had already removed the stake that had stabbed the left side of her upper stomach, and he was grateful that it had not gone deeper because it could have reached her heart and she would have died. "I almost lost you again," he whispered as his thumb touched her cheek. Although she is unconscious, her body hurts, and whenever she moans, he always holds her hand and soothes her with kind words while massaging the back of her hand. On the other hand, Gaara woke up the other morning. Being a tailed beast, he had wounds on his arms that had healed along with his other injuries, though some of them left scars. He was wary of the man who had saved them, and initially he thought that taking Hinata to a healer would make her condition worse, so he agreed with Sasuke. He has been by Hinata's side since he woke up, and he only had a brief conversation with the man who saved them, which makes him uncomfortable because he feels that the unidentified man is treating his princess with the utmost care, as if he were holding something delicate. "I'll assume control." At last, Gaara said to him, "You should get some rest." Sasuke never looked away from Hinata and said, "I'm fine." "You haven't eaten since I woke up 2 days ago." He insisted that you eat something. "I can manage." "Stubborn piece of shit." Gaara walked towards him, furious, his non-existent eyebrows furrowed in frustration. "I am not doing this for you," he said. "For Hinata." "I'm Sake, I'm doing this. When you can't even take care of yourself, how can you properly care for her?" He muttered angrily, mindful that making loud noises would disturb the princess who was sleeping. When his eyes finally met Sasuke's, he remained silent for a moment before rising and leaving the room. "That damned Fire King," Gaara sighed, sitting next to her and watching her sleep. "She's already hurt emotionally, and now she's hurt physically." Naruto is still looking for Hinata in the morning after Kurama allowed him to use his power, and it took him the entire night to locate the scene of her carriage crash. He nearly passed out when he smelled Hinata's blood, enough blood to endanger someone's life, and was still looking when one of the bandits came back too. "What took place here?" In an authoritative tone, he informed him. The bandit gulped, but his saliva seemed to be stuck on his throat, and he trembled in fear as he recognized the man in front of him, the Fire's King, and was instantly terrified by his aura. Glaring at him, Naruto's red eyes asked, "Want to die?" "It's a threat, not a question." He stumbled, W. We a daughter or J. Just bandits. We had the intention of stealing from that carriage. B. However, we haven't done it yet. It was a weak justification." "Where are the passengers in the carriage?" he asked, but this time he approached the bandit and stopped in front of him, causing him to fall to his knees. "There was a monster of a man inside. He went on a rampage and nearly killed us all. There was nothing we could do but fight." "Lies," he blurted out, "but he must live." "Whatever happened to the woman who was with him?" "She was killed by that monster. He went on a rampage and nearly killed us all, I told you." Naruto balled his fist and said, "Gaara may have been a monster once, but he could never hurt Hinata." Knowing that the princess had tamed the one-tailed beast carrier, he looked down at the bandit and saw the bastard grinning. Who does he think he is? Did he think you'll believe of his nonsense? This infuriated him even more. He held the bandit's leg with his right hand and raised him up until he was unable to breathe. The bandit attempted to escape, but the crimson-eyed king was too strong. Weesh, NNGHO, with his final breath, he sobbed. Once again, Naruto had blood on his hands after dropping the bandit's lifeless body on the ground. He killed someone, and despite his belief that he had changed, he remains a murderer and the feared king of the Fire Nation. Hinata. He is a different color, and she is pure like the snow. He is selfish for wanting to be with her, even though he will only taint her. Everything is a mess, and he is to blame. If only he hadn't been influenced by Karen, the princess from his distant memory that he loved very much. Hinata wouldn't be hurt, she wouldn't leave, and they would still be walking in the garden, even though it is covered in white snow. After all, she is the most beautiful flower. He felt that he didn't deserve Hinata's love, and he was suffering because of it. Do you now despise me? Her head is spinning and throbbing, and the wound on her stomach is causing her great suffering. Hinata's eyes fluttered slowly before opening, and then a sudden gush of pain swept through her body, causing her to gasp and cry. Ah! She sobbed because she was accustomed to this type of unbearable pain, which felt like she was being tortured once more. Hinata. Haim, Gaara said, holding her hand. I am here. Gaara is here. He repeatedly reassured her, saying, I'm here. He never imagined seeing her in this state, writhing in pain and discomfort, and he would be happy to take her place if he could. When Sasuke heard her cries, he hurried to the room where she lay. He knew she would hurt when she woke up, but he never imagined she would be this way. He approached her and placed his hand on top of her head, sending her chakra to calm her nerves. Hinata responded right away, closing her eyes slowly and feeling the pain subside. She is exhausted, and Sasuke's chakra helped her fall asleep. Gaara released Hinata's hand, which she had been holding for dear life earlier. It hurt to watch, and he doesn't want her to go through that again. I'll be the one to feed you. Remain with Hinata. Haim and ensure that she doesn't experience that type of pain ever again, Gaara informed him in a grave tone. After confirming that the woman on his bed is indeed Hinata, Sasuke bit the side of his cheeks and said, I know. I'll go back to where the incident happened and see if I can take some of Hinata, Haim's belongings from the carriage. You can't, Sasuke said, staring him in the eyes. I've removed all evidence that points to this location. Are you a fugitive of some sort? Gaara inquired. I shouldn't have been there. All I'm going to say is that. He may have his own reasons, but as long as he doesn't hurt his princess, he won't fry anymore, Gaara replied with a nod of his head. Why was she outside in this weather at sunset? At last, he has the opportunity to question him. The thought of Naruto made Sasuke wince. That damned fire's king, he said, gritting his teeth. His woman drove Hinata, Haim away. Confused, Sasuke asked him what had happened, certain that Naruto always treated Hinata with such care that he had wiped out his entire clan for her sake. What woman? Like Hinata. Haim, she also has white eyes. Hinata. Haim's life became miserable after she claimed to be that foolish king's first love. With Hinata's kingdom and her people already destroyed, Sasuke furrowed his brows. Is her name Hanabi? What? The mere mention of that fucking woman's name, Karen, makes him feel extremely repulsed. When Sasuke remembered hearing the name Karen, he said, it can't be.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.